Section 1. The door at the heart of everything. There is a door at the heart of a fortress that floats between the stars, and nobody opens it. That sentence sounds simple enough. A door, a fortress, the vast and indifferent dark of space. But when you spend time with those words, when you follow them down into the lore of Warhammer 40,000, into the deep machinery of its mythology, you begin to realize that each of those words is carrying an enormous weight. The door is not a door in any ordinary sense. The fortress is not a fortress in any ordinary sense. And nobody opens it is not a statement of neglect or oversight. It is a statement of design. Let's begin with the door itself. Picture a cylindrical structure embedded at the very core of a space station, not attached to a wall, not built into a corridor. At the core, the geometric and architectural heart of a structure that was itself built to be impenetrable. The cylinder is vast. Its entrance, the thing we're calling a door, stands roughly 40 paces high. 40 paces. That's not a door scaled to human beings. That's a door scaled to something else entirely, or perhaps to the weight of what lies behind it. The door is made of adamantine plating, the same material used to armor the prows of Imperial warships, layered as thick here as it would be on a vessel built to punch through enemy hulls at relativistic speeds. Layered on top of that is something even more extraordinary. Void shields. Personal, localized void shielding. The kind of energy barrier that can absorb direct fire from orbital bombardment platforms. The architects of this door did not want it opened. They wanted it to remain closed through catastrophes that would sterilize star systems. They wanted it to endure through wars that would last 10,000 years. They wanted it, if necessary, to survive the end of everything. And then there is the inscription. Carved into the face of the door, or perhaps inlaid, or perhaps burned into the metal through some process that no longer exists in the Imperium's repository of knowledge, is an image. The image shows a figure. The figure is the Emperor of mankind, unmistakable even rendered in the spare symbolic language of pre-imperial art, depicted with that particular gravity that only appears in the oldest iconography, before the ecclesiarchy got hold of the imagery and turned it into cathedral window-stained glass. The Emperor is strangling a coiled serpent, not slaying it, strangling it with his bare hands, wrapping his fingers around the body of something that coils and twists and tries to escape. And above this scene, a single letter, the last letter of the Greek alphabet. Omega. Beneath the image, a phrase in High Gothic that translates to, "And the last fortress is truth." Take a moment with that inscription before we move on, because it tells you something critical about the intentions of the people who built this place. The Emperor does not hold a sword in this image. He does not hold a bolt pistol, or a holy relic, or a tome of divine law. He is strangling something that moves like a serpent, that tries to escape, that is alive and dangerous even in the act of being killed. The last fortress is not a wall or a gun or an army. The last fortress is truth. Whatever is inside this structure, whatever it is that the vault eventually gives to those who guard it, is considered a form of truth. A truth so significant, so foundational, that it required a fortress built to survive the apocalypse. The vault is called the Omega Vault, and it has never been opened by a human hand. This is perhaps the most startling fact about it. For all of its void shielding, for all of its adamantine thickness, for all of its impossible construction, the most extraordinary thing about the Omega Vault is the mechanism by which it operates. It opens itself. There is no key. There is no combination. There is no secret word spoken in the right language by the right person at the right moment. The vault decides when to open. It opens a single chamber. Never the whole thing, never even most of it. It opens one chamber, it releases whatever is inside, and then it closes again. A bell rings when it closes. The bell is part of the structure, and it rings of its own accord. And the sound it makes when it rings is described by those who have heard it as something between a tone and a voice, as though the metal itself is speaking. No living person has ever successfully opened the vault through their own efforts. This has been attempted. Of course it has. The people who guard the Omega Vault are among the most gifted warriors, scholars, and strategists in the entire Imperium of man. 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge and expertise and determination, and none of them have found the mechanism. There are scholars within the institution that guards the vault who have devoted their entire adult lives to studying the exterior of the structure, cataloging every marking, every seam in the metal, every variation in the void shielding output. They have learned nothing that helps them open it. It opens when it decides to open, and when it opens, it is always because something has happened, or is about to happen, that makes what is inside relevant. The structure that houses the Omega Vault is called Watch Fortress Arioch, and it sits in a region of space known as the Jericho Reach, a vast expanse of the galaxy's eastern edge that has been cut off from the rest of the Imperium by a catastrophic warp anomaly, a seething wound in reality called the Hadex anomaly that makes conventional travel through that region somewhere between extremely difficult and flatly impossible. The Jericho Reach is contested territory in the extreme. Chaos forces pour out of the Hadex anomaly. A Tyranid splinter fleet is consuming entire systems, and a Tau expeditionary force has arrived with its own agenda. The Fortress Arioch sits in the middle of all of this, ancient and silent, its most extraordinary secret locked behind a door 40 paces high. The institution that guards it is the Death Watch, the chamber militant of the Ordo Xenos, the Inquisition's dedicated force for fighting alien threats. The Death Watch is composed of Space Marines seconded from every chapter across the Imperium, warriors pulled from the ranks of the Ultramarines, and the Blood Angels and the Space Wolves and hundreds of other chapters, brought together to form kill teams of extraordinary versatility and lethality. These are among the finest soldiers that the human species has ever produced, and their home base, their fortress monastery, is Watch Fortress Arioch. They live in the shadow of the Omega Vault. They eat and sleep and train and plan in corridors that echo with whatever is sealed inside it, and they do not open it. They cannot. They wait for it to open itself, and when it does, they take what it offers, and they go out into the darkness of the Jericho Reach, and they do what the Vault seems to be asking them to do. This has worked, historically. The Vault's gifts have, over the long centuries of its operation, consistently proven to be exactly the right tools or information or resources for whatever crisis was unfolding at the time. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes the connection between gift and crisis doesn't become clear until years or decades later. But the pattern holds. The Vault gives, the Death Watch acts, the crisis passes, or is at least survived. And the locks on the innermost chamber, the place where the final truth is kept, the last weapon, the ultimate gift, are slowly, one by one, undoing themselves. There are only a handful left now. If you're watching this, drop a comment below with where you are watching from and what time it is. I love knowing where in the world this reaches. And if you find yourself wanting more of this kind of story, the subscribe button is right there. It genuinely helps. Now, let's go deeper. Section 2. A fortress that should not exist. Before we can understand the Omega Vault, we have to understand the structure that houses it. And Watch Fortress Arioch is, in its own right, one of the strangest places in the entire setting of Warhammer 40,000. Start with the basics. A Watch Fortress is the highest tier installation in the Death Watch's network of bases. Below Watch Fortresses in the hierarchy sit Watch Stations, which are small monitoring outposts, often automated, scattered across wide regions of space to provide early warning of Xenos activity. Below those sit Watch Posts, even smaller, often little more than a relay beacon and a few Space Marines living in conditions that make monastic austerity look lavish. At the top of the pyramid sits the Watch Fortress, a full installation capable of housing hundreds or thousands of Death Watch warriors. Supporting fleet operations, conducting research, interrogating captured xenological specimens, and functioning as a command and control hub for Death Watch operations across an entire region of the galaxy. Watch Fortress Arioch is the Death Watch's installation for the Jericho Reach. It is, by any reasonable measure, the most important facility the organization operates in this part of the galaxy. And the first thing you notice when you look at it carefully is that it should not be where it is. The Jericho Reach is, as we touched on earlier, a region of space that is largely cut off from the wider Imperium. The Hadex anomaly, a massive warp disturbance of uncertain origin, occupies a significant portion of the region and creates conditions that make standard warp travel through the area deeply unreliable. Ships get lost, navigators go mad. Vessels that enter the anomaly's influence can emerge years or decades displaced in time, or not emerge at all. This is not a neighborhood where you would choose to build your most important regional fortress. And yet here Arioch is, ancient, immovable, apparently placed here long before the Hadex anomaly existed in its current form, or placed here with specific knowledge that the anomaly would exist, and that a fortress in this precise location would be needed anyway. The records that might clarify when Arioch was built and by whom are, if they ever existed, entirely absent. The Deathwatch's own chronicles refer to the fortress as having been established in the region, but the word established is doing an enormous amount of work there. It was not constructed on site because the site is in open space. It was brought here. The most widely accepted theory within Deathwatch scholarship, which is a phrase that requires a moment to appreciate, because Deathwatch scholars are space marines who study ancient fortresses between missions to kill alien apex predators, which is a very particular kind of academic environment, is that Watch Fortress Arioch is, or was, a Ramil's-class star fort. A Ramil's class is an enormous deep space installation, typically constructed in stable orbit around a star or at a Lagrange point, equipped with its own warp drives and plasma reactors, capable of traveling between star systems, albeit very slowly by Imperial standards. They are essentially small planets, built by human hands, carrying everything a major military installation needs to be self-sufficient essentially indefinitely. If Arioch began as a Ramil's class, and the structural evidence for this is described as compelling, though the nature of that evidence is not widely published, then it was transported to the Jericho Reach. Someone decided that this region of space needed a permanent major installation, and instead of building one from scratch, they moved an existing one. This would have been an enormous undertaking even by the standards of the Imperium of Man at its height. The logistics of moving a structure the size of a small moon across interstellar space are staggering, and yet here it is. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. When Deathwatch scholars have attempted to trace the origin of the Ramil's class, they believe became Arioch, cross-referencing fleet records, construction registries, astrocartographic surveys, the records simply end. Not are absent, not were destroyed, not are classified beyond their clearance level. They end. There is a chain of documentation, fragments of evidence pointing back toward a particular vessel or installation, and then the chain stops at a point that precedes the establishment of the Deathwatch's presence in the Jericho Reach. Whatever Arioch was before it became Arioch, the record of it has been comprehensively removed. The fortress itself is immense. Its outer shell bears the marks of millennia of existence, repaired blast damage from engagements that have no surviving after-action reports, sections rebuilt in architectural styles that span thousands of years of Imperial construction, corridors that dead-end for no obvious reason, and suggest chambers or sections beyond them that no current map acknowledges. The great ossuaries are perhaps the most striking feature of the fortress's interior beyond the vault itself. Vast underground chambers filled with the remains of Deathwatch warriors who have served at Arioch across its entire operational history. The ossuaries are so enormous that even at a rate of several hundred deaths per year over a period of several thousand years, significant portions of them remain empty. They were built to house a quantity of dead that the Deathwatch, even at its most active, has not yet produced. Someone built a fortress with room for more dead than currently exist. There are also sections of Watch Fortress Arioch that are formally quarantined. Not quarantined in the sense of under repair or being renovated. Quarantined in the sense that the vault's keepers have discovered things in those sections that they cannot safely understand or interact with, and the most responsible course of action has been to seal them off entirely. Some of these quarantine sections are reported to contain alien technology from species that are not immediately identifiable, that predate the current residents of the fortress by an unknowable margin. There is believed to be, in one quarantine section, an intact gate mechanism of alien construction, the principles of which no current tech adept can explain. In another section, apparently, there are things that respond to human presence in ways that are not currently categorized as dangerous, but are strongly recommended to be avoided anyway. The scholars who made those recommendations declined to elaborate in writing, which is itself a form of communication. All of this sits on top of, or rather around, the Omega Vault at its core. And when you start to understand Arioch as a structure, the vault starts to make a different kind of sense. The fortress is not a fortress that happens to contain the vault. The vault is what the fortress exists to protect. Arioch, its placement, its scale, its impregnability, its quarantined sections, Its ossuaries built for more dead than currently exist. All of it is in service of keeping one cylindrical structure in the middle of space, in the middle of a war zone, accessible to the right people and inaccessible to everyone else. The great ossuaries are not incidental to the fortress's function. They are part of it. The Death Watch warriors who die in the service of Watch Fortress Ariok are not simply honored dead. They are, in some sense that the lore suggests but does not fully articulate, witnesses. The accumulated presence of those who gave their lives in service to the vault, in service to the long vigil over whatever is sealed inside, that is part of what the vault is. The dead are part of the mechanism, that is, at minimum, what the structure implies. The Death Watch's official position is somewhat less mystical. The ossuaries exist to honor the fallen and to preserve the institutional memory of the chapter across millennia. This is absolutely true. It is also, almost certainly, not the entire truth. The fortress does not have blind spots. It has eyes everywhere, sensor arrays, automated turrets, monitored corridors, overlapping fields of fire and observation that a ground assault would need to account for at every step. The approaches to the Omega Vault from outside the fortress are essentially impossible, but the fortress was not built to keep the vault's contents in. It was built to keep things out, specifically to keep out the things that would come if the vault's existence became widely known, because the vault is the kind of object that attracts exactly the sorts of entities that the Imperium of Man cannot afford to attract to its most sensitive installations. Watch Fortress Arios is a target. It has always been a target, and it has never fallen. Not once in all the millennia of its operation has the fortress been successfully breached and the vault accessed by hostile forces. Whether this is because the fortress's defenses have held through skill and sacrifice, or whether the vault itself has something to do with this, whether the structure actively resists being compromised, is another of those questions that Deathwatch scholars write papers about in their most introspective hours. Section 3. The Deathwatch and the Long Vigil to understand why the Omega Vault works the way it does, why it has guardians at all, why those particular guardians were chosen, what the relationship between the vault and its keepers actually means, you have to understand the Death Watch, not just as a military organization, but as a philosophy. The Death Watch is old. Its founding is attributed to the age of the Imperium's consolidation, following the Horus Heresy, though some scholars argue that precursor organizations existed even before the heresy, and that what became the Death Watch was less a creation than a formalization of something that had existed informally for longer. The mandate is clear. The Death Watch is the Imperium's dedicated response force for alien threats. While the Grey Knights address demonic incursion, and the Sisters of Battle address heresy, and the Adeptus Custodes guard the throne itself, the Death Watch watches the dark between the stars, where things that are not human and are not dumb in wait. The structure is unusual among Space Marine organizations. A standard Space Marine chapter is a self-contained unit, a brotherhood of roughly 1,000 warriors drawn from a single genetic line, trained together, living together, dying together, carrying a unified culture and identity across the millennia. The Death Watch, by contrast, draws from every chapter. A Death Watch kill team might contain a Space Wolf from Fenris, an Ultramarine from Macragge, a Blood Angel from Baal, a Raven Guard from Deliverance, a Dark Angel from the Rock, warriors from traditions so different that in other contexts they might regard each other with deep suspicion or outright hostility. The Death Watch takes all of them and puts them in the same room with the same mission and the same black armor. This produces, over time, a very particular kind of warrior. The Death Watch calls its service the Long Vigil, and the phrase is not rhetorical decoration. A Space Marine seconded to the Death Watch may serve for decades, sometimes for the rest of their operational life, before returning to their original chapter, if they return at all. Some Death Watch veterans choose, at the end of their secondment, not to return. They remain with the Death Watch permanently, becoming permanent fixtures of the organization rather than visitors. These permanent members, the Death Watch's institutional backbone, are among the most experienced and battle-hardened warriors in the Imperium. They have fought alien species that no other Imperial force even has reliable intelligence on. They have studied xenological specimens in conditions that would require serious psychological preparation for any ordinary soldier. They have operated for extended periods in regions of space so distant and so hostile that supply lines are essentially theoretical. At Watch Fortress Arioch specifically, the Long Vigil has an additional dimension. The warriors stationed there are not simply fighting alien threats across the Jericho Reach. They are the guardians of the Omega Vault. This is not a secondary duty. It is, in a very real sense, the primary one. The Death Watch's combat operations in the Jericho Reach are in service of keeping the region stable enough, or at least functional enough, that Watch Fortress Arioch can continue to operate, that the vault can continue to be guarded, that whatever is coming toward the vault's final opening is met with a functioning, prepared force rather than the ruins of one. The Watch Commander, the Death Watch's most senior officer at Arioch, carries a specific burden that no other Watch Commander in the organization shares. They are the keeper of the vault's record. Every opening of the vault has been documented across the entire span of the fortress's operation in a continuous chronicle that passes from Watch Commander to Watch Commander. The chronicle is not simply a list of dates and gifts. It includes the Watch Commander's personal analysis of each opening, their assessment of the gift's nature and purpose, their record of what actions the Death Watch took in response, and what the outcomes were. Some of these records are written in the clinical language of military after-action reports. Others, particularly the most ancient ones, have a different character, more meditative, more uncertain, written by warriors who had clearly been sitting with something unsettling for a long time before they committed their thoughts to the page. The Chamber of Vigilance is the council body through which the Watch Commander exercises authority at Arioch. It is composed of the senior watch captains and the masters of the various specialist functions. The Master of the Vigil, who coordinates field operations, the Master of the Forge, who maintains the fortress's materiel, the Master of the Apothecarion, who tends to the fortress's wounded and manages the Death Watch's genocide preservation, the Master of Librarians, who coordinates the fortress's psychic assets and the vast archives of xenological scholarship. These individuals collectively hold the most comprehensive understanding of the Vault's history and the Jericho Reach's strategic situation of any group alive. They meet regularly to discuss the Vault, not to try to open it. That conversation, while it has certainly been had across the centuries, is largely exhausted at this point. The mechanism cannot be found. The locks cannot be manipulated. The void shields cannot be penetrated by anything available to them. They meet to discuss what they know about the Vault, to update their collective understanding of its behavior, to try to anticipate when it might open next and what it might give. They are attempting, in their careful and learned way, to develop a predictive model for an object that operates according to principles they do not understand. Their success in this project has been partial. They have identified certain patterns. The Vault opens more frequently when the situation in the Jericho Reach deteriorates significantly. It opens more frequently when major strategic decisions are being made by the Achilles Crusade Command, the Imperial military force that is currently attempting to reconquer the Jericho Reach. It has opened in response to specific events in ways that, while not predictable in the sense of we knew it was going to open, feel retrospectively meaningful, like the Vault was watching the same situation they were watching and reached a similar conclusion about what was needed. This has led some members of the Chamber of Vigilance to a conclusion they are uncomfortable with, but cannot dismiss. The Vault is not passive. It is not a repository that happens to have a self-opening mechanism. It is, in some sense that none of them can fully explain, aware. It monitors the situation in the Jericho Reach. It monitors the state of Watch Fortress Arioch. It monitors the Death Watch's operational capacity. And when conditions align, when the need is acute enough and the Death Watch capable enough of acting on what it receives, the Vault responds. An object that is aware of its context and responds to it is, under any reasonable philosophical framework, an agent. And an object that has been operating as an agent for potentially thousands of years, in service of goals that were set at its creation, is an object with intentions. The Chamber of Vigilance does not use the word intentions in their official records. They use words like parameters and activation conditions and operational thresholds. But the thing those words are pointing at is the same thing intentions points at. The Death Watch's psychological relationship with the Vault is fascinating and, in places, genuinely poignant. The warriors who serve at Arioch live in a state of perpetual waiting. They fight, they train, they study, they carry out missions across the Reach. But underlying all of it is the awareness that the vault is there, that it contains something important, that they are the people who will act when it opens. This waiting has shaped the culture of the fortress in ways that are visible even in its physical architecture. Certain meditation chambers in Ariok are oriented toward the vault's location within the structure, not because any official doctrine mandates this, but because over centuries of occupation, warriors have naturally gravitated to positions of contemplation that face the vault's direction. The long corridors leading to the vault's immediate housing are kept immaculately clean, swept and polished to a standard that no tactical function requires, because the warriors who serve there treat the approach to the vault as sacred ground. There are rituals around the vault that do not appear in any official Deathwatch liturgy. The changing of the guard at the vault's immediate housing follows a protocol that, when analyzed, contains elements that predate the Deathwatch's establishment at Ariok, elements that suggest the vault had guardians before the Deathwatch, and that whatever protocols those earlier guardians followed were somehow preserved and incorporated into later practice. Nobody knows exactly when this happened. Nobody knows who the earlier guardians were. The protocol simply persists, passed from warrior to warrior, generation to generation, older than the institution it now belongs to. The Deathwatch is, in this sense, not simply an organization that guards the vault. It is an organization that has been shaped by the vault over time, molded by the experience of proximity to something that enormous and that ancient, into precisely the kind of force that can act on what the vault provides, patient enough to wait, capable enough to respond, diverse enough in its expertise to handle whatever strange gift emerges, experienced enough in the alien and the incomprehensible not to be paralyzed by things that make no immediate sense. Whether this shaping was intentional, whether whoever built the vault and established the Deathwatch's presence in the Jericho Reach understood what long proximity to the vault would do to the organization, is, again, one of those questions that the Chamber of Vigilance approaches carefully. The answer implied by everything else about the vault's design is yes. The vault did not simply end up with excellent guardians by coincidence. It cultivated them. Across all the millennia that the Deathwatch has stood watch at Ariok, the vigil has held. The door with the Emperor strangling the serpent has never been forced. The bell has rung when it chose to ring, and not one moment sooner. And the warriors in their black armor have stood in the corridors of an impossible fortress and waited for a truth they can almost hear through the metal, the way you can almost make out words in the sound of wind through old stone. Almost, but not yet. Section 4. Inside the Vault. Architecture of Secrets. Nobody has walked through the Omega Vault in its entirety. This is not a failure of courage or a failure of planning. It is simply the nature of the structure. When the vault opens, and it opens at its own discretion, presenting one chamber at a time, what the Deathwatch receives is a controlled glimpse. A single room, a single corridor section, a single sub-vault, made accessible for a period of time. When the bell rings again, what was open is closed, and the opportunity to explore further is gone. But across centuries of these partial openings, across the careful documentation of every glimpse the vault has offered, a picture of the interior has assembled itself. It is not complete. There are vast sections of the vault's interior that have never been seen. The overall volume of the structure is known. The outer dimensions are measurable from the outside, but the interior volume implied by the substructures that have been glimpsed is apparently significantly larger than the external measurements would suggest. The scholars who work on this problem have produced no satisfying explanations. The less practical members of this group have produced several fascinating ones. What has been seen divides broadly into two categories: infrastructure and contents. The infrastructure of the interior, the corridors, the connecting passages, the mechanisms that regulate the internal environment, is built to a standard that exceeds anything the current Imperium of Man can produce. The corridors are wide enough for multiple Astartes to walk abreast in full armor, which is relevant because the Deathwatch did not exist when this vault was built, and building corridors sized for Space Marine width implies either remarkable foresight or a different standard of construction that happens to be compatible. The walls are a metal alloy that spectrographic analysis cannot fully characterize. It contains elements in proportions and configurations that do not appear in any metallurgical reference in the Mechanicus's archives. The material is not inert. It responds to proximity subtly, in ways that are measured but not understood. The lighting in the interior is self-sustaining. Not powered by any connection to the fortress's external power grid, the vault has never been connected to Arioch's systems, and when tech adepts have attempted to interface with the vault's power systems to understand how it functions, they have encountered what is politely described as robust resistance. The vault powers itself. Whatever its power source is, it has been operating for the entire known history of the fortress, without maintenance, without fuel inputs, without any visible degradation in output. The kind of power source that can run a vault-sized installation for thousands of years without intervention would be, by any current imperial assessment, somewhere between priceless and impossible. The staircase structure that connects the vault's levels is one of the most frequently remarked upon features in the documentation. The staircases are described as spiral. They descend in a slow, wide helix rather than the straight runs or right-angle turns that imperial construction typically favors. Something about the geometry of the spiral staircase and the spacing of the corridors that branch off from it creates, in Deathwatch warriors who have walked them, a powerful sense of purposeful progression. Scholars who have spent time in the accessible sections describe not just the physical experience of moving through the space, but an emotional or psychological quality, the sense that the architecture is doing something to the visitor's state of mind, preparing them for something, orienting their attention. No psychic activity has been detected in these sections. No warp influence. The effect, whatever it is apparently entirely architectural, the product of proportion and geometry and the relationship between spaces. The builders of the vault understood something about how physical environments affect the minds that move through them, and they applied that understanding deliberately. Off the spiral staircases, at irregular intervals, are the catacomb subvaults. These are smaller chambers that branch off the main structure, each with its own security, each apparently dedicated to a specific category of contents. The subvaults that have been opened tend to share certain features: ancient parchment documents marked with silver ink that has not faded in thousands of years, sealed containers of various sizes and materials, specimens both organic and mechanical that require immediate careful handling. The silver marking on the documents is particularly notable. Silver in this context is not simply a metallic pigment. The Deathwatch's scholars believe the silver itself is part of the document's preservation mechanism, a material chosen because of specific properties that prevent degradation across millennia of storage. One subvault opened to reveal something different from these archival materials: a pathogen, a synthetic, artificially engineered pathogen, sealed in containers that maintain their integrity completely across whatever span of time the vault had been sealed. The pathogen was inert outside the vault. It required specific environmental conditions that only existed within the controlled atmosphere of the subvault to remain active. But analysis of its structure revealed something extraordinary and deeply unsettling. It was specifically lethal to every form of biological life, yet cataloged with a single exception: baseline humanity. The pathogen was designed with extraordinary precision to kill everything that is not a human being while leaving human beings unharmed. It is, in the most literal sense possible, a xenocidal bioweapon, a weapon designed to end all non-human life. The implications of possessing such a weapon are not lost on the Deathwatch. The implications of its existence at all are not lost on anyone who has seriously considered the vault's contents. Someone built this. Someone built a weapon capable of sterilizing a planet, perhaps a system, perhaps more, of every living thing except human beings, sealed it in an ancient and imperishable vault, and arranged for it to be delivered to the Deathwatch in the Jericho Reach at an appropriate moment. The appropriate moment question: when would the use of a weapon like this be appropriate, and why would the vault's builder consider the Jericho Reach at this particular period in history the right context for its deployment, is one that the Chamber of Vigilance has spent considerable time with, without arriving at a conclusion they are comfortable stating aloud. The bell is perhaps the most intimate piece of the vault's architecture. It is not a separate structure. It is part of the vault itself, built into the exterior surface in a way that suggests it was always intended as a functional component rather than decorative. The bell rings when the vault closes after an opening. The sound is described in consistent terms across multiple witness accounts spanning centuries. It is a clear, sustained tone that carries further than a bell of its size should be able to carry, that is somehow both metallic and resonant in a way that feels almost vocal. Warriors who have heard it describe the experience as arresting, not frightening, but deeply significant, in the way that unexpected silence can be significant in a battle. The bell rings and the world feels momentarily still. In a culture defined by the noise of war, bolters and chain blades and screaming and engines, the constant percussion of apocalyptic conflict, a sound that makes the world feel still is something extraordinary. The Deathwatch warriors who have heard the bell describe it as clarifying. Whatever they were thinking about or worrying about in the moment before the bell rang becomes temporarily irrelevant. For the duration of the tone, there is only the sound and the awareness of what it means. The vault has spoken, has offered what it chose to offer, and has returned to silence. The innermost chamber of the vault, the one that all the spiral staircases and the sub-vaults and the unlocking mechanisms are ultimately leading toward, has never been seen. The locks that secure it have been slowly undoing themselves across the vault's operational history, one by one, responding to conditions that the Chamber of Vigilance has cataloged but cannot fully predict. As of the most recent period documented in the lore, only a handful of locks remain on the innermost chamber. The ones that have already undone themselves were not opened by any action of the Deathwatch. They simply ceased to be locked, each one coinciding with a significant event in the Jericho Reach. What the Chamber of Vigilance believes waits in the innermost chamber is stated in their records with unusual directness for an organization that typically prefers careful circumlocution. The final truth and the last weapon. Not one or the other, both. A truth of sufficient magnitude and a weapon of sufficient scale that together they represent the ultimate gift the vault can give, and the ultimate purpose for which the vault was built. The moment when the final lock undoes itself will be the most important moment in the history of Watch Fortress Ariok, perhaps in the history of the Jericho Reach, perhaps in the history of the Imperium of Man in this region of the galaxy, during this crisis, in this era. Nobody knows what that moment will look like. They only know it is coming, and that the locks are almost gone. Section 5. What the Vault has given the history of the Omega Vault's gifts to the Deathwatch is the most concrete evidence available for what the Vault actually is and what it is designed to do. This history spans several thousand years, beginning from the earliest period of the Deathwatch's operation at Ariok and running continuously to the present day, with the tempo of openings increasing as the situation in the Jericho Reach has become more acute. Let us walk through the documented gifts, not as a simple list, but as a sequence of events, because the sequence matters. The gifts are not random. They are a conversation. The earliest recorded opening of the vault, for which detailed documentation survives, occurred in the year 263 of the 36th millennium. So, roughly 9,000 years before the current period that the 40K setting focuses on, the late 41st millennium. The vault opened to reveal a chamber containing a single object, a broken spear. The spear was ancient, its manufacture predating the current millennium by thousands of years, by any assessment the Deathwatch's tech adepts could make, and it was broken approximately a third of the way from the tip. The break not recent but very old, as though the spear had been broken long before it was placed in the vault. There were no accompanying documents, no instructions, no explanation, only the spear. What the Deathwatch did with the broken spear is what happened next, and it reveals how the vault shapes the organization. Unable to determine the spear's purpose or origin, the Watch Commander at the time distributed descriptions of the object to every Deathwatch operative in the Jericho Reach, and to every informant network the organization maintained in the region. He did this without knowing why. It seemed like the right response to a mysterious gift, to share its description and see what resonated. Months later, a watch sergeant operating in a system called Sovereign reported that a local warlord, a figure of significant military importance in the region's politics, had recently acquired a historical artifact, the second part of a broken spear, the other third, which according to local legend was the haft of a weapon that had once belonged to a figure the sovereign populace called the Thunderlord. The watch sergeant confirmed the match. The spear's two pieces, when brought together and studied jointly, revealed something that neither piece revealed alone. An inscription in a language that predated the Jericho Reach's current inhabitants by at least 2,000 years, which when translated by a Deathwatch librarian with expertise in archaic xenolinguistics, described the precise location of a cyst, a hidden lair of a genestealer cult embedded in the sovereign populace. A cult that had been operating for generations, unseen, growing toward a critical mass that would have triggered the arrival of a Tyranid vanguard force within, by the librarian's estimate, 2 to 3 decades. The Death Watch deployed to Sovereign. They destroyed the cult. They prevented the Tyranid vanguard from arriving in the Sovereign system. One broken spear, opened from a vault at the right moment, had prevented the loss of a star system, and the vault had known this would be possible. It had contained the information necessary to achieve this outcome, sealed away, waiting for the right moment when the Death Watch was positioned to act on it. The next major documented opening came in 274 of the 38th millennium, roughly 2,000 years later. The vault opened to reveal a data crystal, a small, faceted storage medium of a type that the Death Watch's tech adepts did not recognize. The crystal required a specialist to access its contents, someone with particular expertise in pre-imperial data storage. And while that specialist was located and brought to Arioch, the vault remained open, waiting. When the data was finally accessed, it contained a set of stellar coordinates, just coordinates, a location in space with no context provided. There was a problem with the coordinates. When the Death Watch's astrocartographers plotted them, they discovered that the location indicated corresponded to a region of space that had no cataloged star systems, no known features, nothing that would explain why a set of coordinates pointing to empty space was significant enough to be sealed in an ancient vault. They logged it and prepared to file it as a mystery. Before they could do so, an astropath in the fortress's astropathic choir suffered what was described as a spontaneous communion, an unsolicited vision, unbidden, powerful enough to render her temporarily catatonic. When she recovered, she communicated a single message with evident urgency. The location indicated by the coordinates was not empty space. Something was there, something old, something that should not be approached. 3 weeks later, the astropath died. The cause of death was listed as psychic trauma sustained during the unsolicited communion. Her death was the first recorded fatality directly attributable to a vault opening, and it prompted the Chamber of Vigilance to formalize the procedures for receiving and processing vault gifts that remain in use to the present day. The coordinates were quarantined as information, not destroyed, because destroying vault gifts was considered potentially catastrophic, but marked as a category requiring extraordinary caution and not to be acted upon without full Chamber of Vigilance authorization. The location to which they point has never been visited by the Death Watch. The warning delivered by the dying astropath, that it should not be approached, has been respected. Whatever is at those coordinates remains there, untouched, presumably still being whatever it was 2,000 years ago. Perhaps the most extraordinary single event in the Vault's documented gift history occurred in 656 of the 40th millennium, only about 400 years before the present day of the setting. The vault opened to reveal 7 scrolls, not a data crystal, not a physical weapon, not a specimen, 7 documents, rolled, sealed with a wax the Death Watch could not identify, written in a language that required considerable effort to translate. The scrolls contained battle plans, detailed operational-level battle plans for a specific type of conflict, a multi-system defense against a Tyranid invasion force. The battle plans included troop dispositions, recommended weapon loads for anti-Tyranid combat, specific tactical approaches to various Tyranid organism types, and most remarkably, a designation for the Tyranid force in question. The scrolls called it Hive Fleet Dagon. No Hive Fleet called Dagon was known to exist at the time. The Death Watch's xenological records contain no such designation. The Tyranid threat in the galaxy in 656 M40 was significant. The aftermath of Hive Fleet Behemoth's assault on Ultramar was well within living memory, but no major Tyranid force was operating in or near the Jericho Reach. The scrolls were filed, studied, and ultimately archived as an unexplained but presumably important gift from the vault. The battle plans were preserved intact. The Death Watch took note of the designation. Approximately 250 years later, a Tyranid splinter fleet appeared at the edge of the Jericho Reach. Analysis confirmed that its biosignature profile matched the organism types described in the scrolls. It was designated Hive Fleet Dagon. The Vault had provided battle plans for a Tyranid invasion 250 years before that invasion arrived. The scrolls were taken out of archive. The battle plans, written by an unknown hand at an unknown time for a Tyranid fleet that did not yet exist when they were written, were distributed to Deathwatch kill teams operating in the Orpheus Salient, the Achilles Crusades campaign front against the Tyranid incursion. They worked, not perfectly, not without significant casualties, but the plans contained tactical insights that no contemporary strategic analysis had produced, approaches to specific Tyranid organism types that proved highly effective in ways that could not have been derived from first principles without the specific experience the scroll's author apparently possessed. Someone had fought Hive Fleet Dagon before the fleet existed, and had written down what they learned. Other gifts from the vault include specimens of alien biology that had no match in the Deathwatch's xenological database at the time of their receipt. In some cases, species that were subsequently encountered decades or centuries later. In other cases, species that have not yet been encountered and may represent fauna from regions of the galaxy not yet explored. There is a section of the Ariok archives dedicated entirely to vault-originated xenological specimens, treated with significant caution because several of them, over the centuries, have demonstrated properties not immediately apparent on first examination. One specimen, apparently organic but of uncertain taxonomic category, began exhibiting active biological processes approximately 60 years after it was received from the vault. This surprised everyone considerably. There is also a documented case of the vault providing a living person. This is perhaps the most human of the vault's gifts, and in some ways the most disturbing. A chamber open to reveal a single individual, an astropath, in perfect physical health, in stasis, with no indication of how long they had been in the stasis field. When the astropath was revived and the stasis field disengaged, they were immediately and urgently communicative. They had a message to deliver and had apparently been sealed in the vault for the express purpose of delivering it. The message was 2 words. The content of those 2 words is redacted in all surviving accounts of this event. Whatever the astropath said is known to the Watch Commander and to the senior members of the Chamber of Vigilance and to nobody else. The astropath died within hours of delivering the message. The cause recorded as complications arising from an extended stasis period of indeterminate length. The 2-word message has shaped the Chamber of Vigilance's strategic posture in ways that are visible, their priorities, their responses to specific situations, certain standing orders that exist without public justification, but the content remains sealed. 2 words, and they changed how the most senior leaders of the Deathwatch in the Jericho Reach think about everything they are doing. Whatever the vault is, it is not careless with its gifts. Every opening has been purposeful. Every gift has been, in retrospect, exactly the right thing for the situation it was addressing. The vault does not give gifts for comfort or ceremony. It gives tools and information and, apparently, messengers. Tools for specific jobs. Information for specific moments. Messengers carrying specific truths that cannot be committed to more permanent record because their power depends on being delivered by a person, face to face, in the moment of crisis. The frequency of openings has been increasing. In the early centuries of documented vault history, openings were rare. Decades might pass between them. In the 39th millennium, the pace accelerated. In the 40th millennium, it accelerated further. In the current period, the very late 41st millennium, the era of the Achilles Crusade, and the assault of Hive Fleet Dagon and the pressure of chaos forces from the Hadex anomaly, the vault has been opening at a rate that the Deathwatch has not previously experienced. The Chamber of Vigilance's working assumption is that the situation in the Jericho Reach is at or near the point of crisis that the vault was built to address, and that the increasing frequency of openings reflects the vault's own assessment of how little time remains. Section 6. The Jericho Reach and why it matters. There is a reason the Omega Vault is in the Jericho Reach specifically, and not somewhere else in the galaxy. To understand why the vault was placed here, why someone considered this region so important that they built an imperishable fortress around an inexhaustible gift-giving machine and positioned it in this particular star cluster, you have to understand what the Jericho Reach is. Not just geographically, but strategically, historically, and perhaps cosmically. The Jericho Reach occupies a region of the galaxy's eastern edge, well into the Ultima Segmentum, the vast quarter of the Milky Way beyond the galactic core, stretching toward the rim. It is an enormous volume of space, containing hundreds of inhabited star systems, many of them with long histories of human habitation, dating back to the Dark Age of technology or before. In the era before the heresy, the Jericho Reach was apparently a prosperous region. The scattered evidence that survives suggests a high density of inhabited worlds, an active trade network, and a level of technological sophistication that placed the region among the more advanced of the pre-heresy Imperium's territories. Then, at some point during or shortly after the Horus heresy, something happened to the Jericho Reach. The precise nature of this event is not documented. The records for that period in this region are catastrophically incomplete, but the outcome is clear. The region was effectively cut off. The warp routes through the Reach became unreliable. Contact with the wider Imperium became sporadic, then rare, then essentially ceased. The worlds of the Jericho Reach did not simply stop receiving Imperial attention. They fell off the map, in a very practical sense, because ships that tried to navigate to them faced warp conditions that made the journey deeply hazardous. This isolation lasted for thousands of years. What happened to the human populations of the Jericho Reach during those thousands of years of isolation is a topic that the Death Watch has spent considerable effort studying, because the Achilles Crusade's mission is to reintegrate these populations into the Imperium, and that process requires understanding what those populations have become. The answer, on most worlds, is complicated. Some worlds maintained coherent human societies, retaining some fragments of imperial culture and even imperial faith, though often in forms that the Missionaria Ecclesiastica finds deeply heterodox. Some worlds slid into savagery as the infrastructure of technological civilization broke down without the support networks that made it possible. Some worlds were conquered by alien species that moved into the vacuum left by the Imperium's absence. Some worlds experience things that don't fit neatly into any of these categories and require extended reports to adequately describe. The agent of the Jericho Reach's isolation, or at least the most visible feature of it, is the Hadex anomaly. This is a massive, persistent warp disturbance that occupies a significant portion of the Reach's interior, creating conditions in and around it that make warp travel through the affected region extremely dangerous. The anomaly is not static. It expands and contracts, fluctuates, occasionally erupts in ways that affect real space as well as the warp. Its effects include temporal distortion in areas near its boundary. Ships that pass close to the Hadex anomaly sometimes emerge from the warp, at times significantly displaced from their intended arrival, hours, days, occasionally years. There are documented cases of vessels that left the anomaly's vicinity and arrived at their destinations before they departed, which is the kind of thing that tends to have significant effects on the people involved. The origin of the Hadex anomaly is unknown. The theories that exist fall roughly into three categories. The first holds that it is a natural warp phenomenon, a particularly severe example of the kind of warp storm that occurs periodically throughout the galaxy, caused by some combination of local warp real space geography and the general turbulence of the warp in the post-heresy era. The second holds that it was caused by some cataclysmic event in the Jericho Reach. A war, a weapon, some act of incomprehensible destruction that wounded the fabric of reality in this region and left the wound unhealed for 10,000 years. The third theory, which is the one that the Chamber of Vigilance treats most seriously and documents most carefully in their internal records, is that the Hadex anomaly is not a wound or an accident at all. It is a presence. Something exists inside the anomaly, something that is not a natural storm, not a residual effect of past violence, but an active, intentional entity or collection of entities that is using the anomaly as both a home and a weapon. The evidence for the third theory is circumstantial but substantial. The anomaly behaves in ways that are difficult to explain through purely mechanical processes. It has expanded at points that coincide with imperial strategic setbacks in the region, as though it is responsive to or aware of the military situation outside its boundaries. Forces that emerge from the anomaly, the chaos warbands that periodically pour out of it to assault imperial and civilian targets across the Reach, show evidence of coordination that would require a commanding intelligence. And there are astropathic reports from psychically sensitive individuals who have operated near the anomaly's edge of a presence within it, something vast, cold, and patient. If the Hadex anomaly is a presence rather than a phenomenon, if there is something inside it that is directing the chaos forces that emerge from it, that is watching the events of the Jericho Reach with strategic intent, then the entire strategic picture of the region changes. The Achilles Crusade is not simply fighting a conventional military campaign against scattered enemies. It is fighting against something that may be orchestrating those enemies from within an impenetrable warp fortress of its own. This is the context into which the Vault's gifts fit. The Chaos forces of the Hadex anomaly represent one threat to the Jericho Reach. Hive Fleet Dagon represents a second, and then there is the third. The Tau presence in the Jericho Reach is, in strategic terms, the most recently arrived threat, but it is in some ways the most puzzling. The Tau are a young species by galactic standards. They have existed as a starfaring civilization for only a few thousand years, which is essentially nothing on the timescale that species like the Eldar or the ancient races of the galaxy operate on. Their expansion into the Jericho Reach is part of their broader pattern of establishing and extending what they call the greater good. Their philosophy of cooperative progress under Tau guidance. The Canis Salient, one of the Achilles Crusade's 3 campaign fronts, is dedicated to pushing back the Tau expansion. But here is the thing about the Tau in the Jericho Reach that doesn't quite fit their standard expansion pattern. They were there before the Achilles Crusade arrived. When the Crusade began its push into the Reach in the early 41st millennium, they discovered that Tau forces were already present, already established, already operating in ways that indicated they had been in the region for some time. This is not entirely unusual for the Tau. They are expansionist, and their expeditionary forces sometimes precede broader colonization pushes. But the scale and organization of the Tau presence suggested that this was not simply an advance force that had wandered in. The Tau had been directed to the Jericho Reach. They possessed star charts that guided their expeditionary forces into the region, with what appears to have been specific knowledge of where to go. Star charts of ancient origin, pointing them toward specific star systems in the Reach. Where the Tau obtained these star charts, what their source was, how old they are, who made them, is a mystery that has been categorized by the Death Watch as one of the most significant outstanding intelligence questions in the Jericho Reach. Because if someone made star charts pointing the Tau toward the Jericho Reach, that someone knew the Tau would expand in this direction. That someone knew the Jericho Reach would need to be contested by a power that would force the Imperium to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Or, and this is the theory that the Chamber of Vigilance returns to most often, that someone wanted the Tau here, wanted them in the Reach at this time, as part of a larger strategic picture that only makes sense when you can see all of it at once. 3 threats, 1 ancient region, 1 ancient vault at the heart of an ancient fortress, producing gifts calibrated to the specific nature of each crisis as it unfolds. And somehow, all 3 threats, the chaos of the Hadex anomaly, the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Dagon, the Tau with their mysterious star charts, arrived in the Jericho Reach at roughly the same time, creating a convergence that the Achilles Crusade is struggling to manage on all 3 fronts simultaneously. That convergence is not, in the Chamber of Vigilance's assessment, a coincidence. The question is whether the convergence is the problem the Vault was built to solve, the moment toward which all of its gifts have been leading, or whether it is the precursor to the actual problem, the situation that must be survived before what the Vault's innermost chamber contains can be meaningfully used. The Jericho Reach is, in this reading, not just a strategic objective. It is a battlefield that someone anticipated would exist at this moment in history and prepared accordingly. Section 7, the accelerating countdown. There is a word that appears, with increasing frequency, in the internal communications of the Death Watch's Chamber of Vigilance as you move through the documented history of the Jericho Reach toward the present day. Imminence. The situation is becoming imminent. The resolution is imminent. The final opening is imminent. Warriors who have devoted their entire careers, in some cases their entire lives, to studying the Vault's behavior and the region's strategic situation are arriving independently at the same conclusion. Whatever the Vault was built to do, the moment for it to do, it is not centuries away. It is not even decades away. The locks on the innermost chamber are almost gone. To understand why the pace of events has accelerated so dramatically, you need to understand what the Achilles Crusade actually is and what it has been doing to the Jericho Reach. The Crusade was launched in 777 of the 41st millennium, barely over 2 centuries ago by the setting's present day, by Lord Militant Tiber Achilles, who convinced the High Lords of Terra that the Jericho Reach represented both a significant strategic opportunity and a significant threat. and that the Imperium should commit major military resources to reconquering and reintegrating it. The logic was sound. The Jericho Reach, before its isolation, had been a productive region, populated, industrially developed, containing several worlds of significant strategic value. Reintegrating it into the Imperium would add those resources to the war effort, and the threats emerging from the Reach, the chaos forces from the Hadex anomaly, the alien species that had moved in during the isolation period, were problems that would only grow worse if left unaddressed. Achilles himself died before the crusade he launched had fully consolidated its initial gains. He was killed in battle in 790 M41, roughly 13 years after the crusade began, and he died having made progress but not having resolved the strategic situation he had set out to address. His successors have faced a war that has grown steadily more complicated and more costly as the three-front nature of the campaign has become apparent. The Crusade's three operational axes are called salients, each one a separate campaign front directed at a different threat. The Akero salient pushes toward the Hadex anomaly and the chaos forces that emerge from it. This is, in many ways, the most important front. The anomaly is the root of the region's instability, and if it could be contained or neutralized, the strategic picture would change dramatically. But the anomaly is not simply a military problem. It is a warp phenomenon, and warp phenomena do not respond to military pressure in conventional ways. The Akero salient has made progress in terms of territory captured and enemy forces destroyed, but the anomaly itself remains, continues to expand, and continues to produce new threats. Every step forward on the Akero salient is bought at enormous cost, and the gains are constantly at risk of being rolled back. The Canis salient addresses the Tau expansion in the northern portion of the Reach. This has been the most tactically complex of the three fronts, because the Tau are not simply alien invaders, they are also diplomats, and their approach to conquest involves offering alternatives to resistance. Join the greater good, and the transition to Tau governance is smooth and bloodless. Some of the worlds in the Canis salient's area of operations have accepted these offers, which creates a political and military situation that is very different from the straightforward reconquest that the Crusade's planners originally envisioned. The Tau are also genuinely capable military opponents. Their Firecast forces represent a sophisticated combined arms force that has proven very difficult to dislodge from fortified positions. The Orpheus salient is the front against Hive Fleet Dagon, and it has, in recent years, become the most immediately threatening. Hive Fleet Dagon arrived at the edge of the Jericho Reach with the slow, patient, inexorable momentum characteristic of Tyranid incursions, and it has been consuming systems at a rate that threatens to outpace the Crusade's ability to establish effective defensive lines. The scrolls from the vault, the battle plans written 250 years before the fleet arrived, have been deployed to good effect, but good effect has not meant reversal of the Tyranid advance. The Orpheus salient has suffered catastrophic casualties. Multiple worlds have been lost to the Hive Fleet's consumption, and the rate of advance appears to be increasing rather than stabilizing. The Crusade is fighting on three fronts simultaneously, each front representing a different category of existential threat, against enemies that, despite not appearing to be coordinated with each other, are effectively producing a combined pressure that no single front strategy can address. The Chaos forces require attention because they are probing for weaknesses in the Crusade's rear. The Tau require attention because they are consolidating territorial gains that will be very difficult to reverse if allowed to solidify. The Tyranids require attention because every system they consume is gone, permanently, and the rate of consumption is alarming. Into this environment, the Vault's pace of opening has increased dramatically. Since the launch of the Achilles Crusade, roughly 2 centuries in real terms, the Vault has opened more times than in the preceding millennium. It has opened in apparent response to specific battlefield situations, providing information or resources that proved critical at the point of crisis where they arrived. It has opened before major strategic decisions, providing material that influenced those decisions in ways that retrospective analysis suggests were beneficial. It has opened after catastrophic losses, providing resources that allowed the Death Watch to respond in ways that prevented the catastrophes from cascading into existential collapses. Most significantly, the locks on the innermost chamber have been undoing themselves at an accelerating rate. The Chamber of Vigilance maintains a running count of the remaining locks, and they update that count after every opening. The count has been declining. The rate of decline has been increasing. The members of the Chamber of Vigilance who have been present at multiple lock reductions describe the experience of watching the count drop as both exciting and deeply frightening, in the way that watching a fuse burn down might be exciting and deeply frightening. The end of the countdown means something enormous is coming, and you believe it is what you have been waiting for, but you cannot be certain you are ready for it. The Tyranid threat has particular resonance in this context, because the Vault's gifts regarding Hive Fleet Dagon represent the most dramatic prophetic achievement in the entire documented history of the Vault. The scrolls were provided 250 years early. 250 years. The battle plans they contained were written for a war that wouldn't begin for generations. The person or persons who wrote those plans and sealed them in the Vault had not simply anticipated a Tyranid incursion. They had anticipated this specific Tyranid incursion at this specific time, in this specific region. The level of foreknowledge implied by that is, in the Chamber of Vigilance's considered assessment, beyond any ordinary human precognitive ability. It implies access to information that does not exist at a single point in time, or it implies that the Tyranid incursion was, in some meaningful sense, already fixed, already determined, already inevitable, centuries before it arrived. If the Tyranid incursion was inevitable, if the assault of Hive Fleet Dagon on the Jericho Reach was not a contingency to be planned against, but a certainty to be prepared for, then the question shifts from, how do we prevent this, to, what was this always leading to? The Vault scrolls were not a warning, they were preparation. Preparation for something the Vault's builders knew would happen in a region they had identified as the place it would happen, at a time they had positioned their instrument to be able to respond. The acceleration of the countdown is not alarming if you reframe it this way. It is simply the schedule approaching its completion. Every lock that falls is another element of the preparation being finalized. Every gift the Vault provides is another piece of the response being assembled. The Death Watch is not watching a disaster unfold from behind a wall. They are watching a plan execute, and they are the mechanism of its execution. This is, at minimum, how the most optimistic members of the Chamber of Vigilance choose to think about it. Their less optimistic colleagues point out that the plan executes regardless of whether we're ready, and we are running out of time to be ready are not actually comforting framings of the same situation. There are, at the time of the most recent documented assessment, very few locks remaining on the innermost chamber. The Chamber of Vigilance has begun preparing for the final opening in ways that go beyond their normal operational readiness. The Watch Commander has been reviewing the complete chronicle of Vault gifts, all of them, from the earliest documented opening to the most recent, trying to understand the shape of the whole before the final piece is revealed. The Master of the Apothecarion has been quietly expanding the fortress's medical capacity. The Master of the Forge has been conducting a comprehensive inventory of every artifact and resource the Vault has ever provided, assessing what is still available and what has been expended. Thus, Deathwatch at Watch Fortress Ariok is preparing for something. They are not entirely sure what. But they believe, because the Vault has never been wrong, because its gifts have never been misplaced, because the pattern of its operation across millennia points to a specific endpoint, that when the final lock falls, they will know. Section 8. Who built it and when? At some point in the long study of the Omega Vault, the question that demands an answer is the most fundamental one available. Who built this? Who built a structure that self-operates, that contains synthetic pathogens targeting all non-human life, that held battle plans for a war that would not begin for 250 years, that was placed in a fortress in the middle of an isolated region of space that would not need it for thousands of years? Who had that kind of foresight, that kind of capability, that kind of patience? The Death Watch's answer to the question of human or non-human origin is surprisingly firm. The Vault was built by human hands. This is not a sentimental conclusion or a piece of imperial propaganda. It is based on specific material evidence. The pathogen that the Vault contained, the synthetic, xenocidal bioweapon that kills all life except baseline humanity, is lethal to every species yet cataloged, but harmless to human beings. This is not a coincidence of design. This is a specific design choice, a detail that only makes sense if the builders were human and wanted to preserve their own people. Non-human builders would not have calibrated the pathogen to spare humans specifically. The sparing of humans is the signature of human authorship. The materials used in the vault's construction, the alloy of unknown composition, the silver-marked preservation system for documents, the self-sustaining power source, exceed the current Imperium's manufacturing capabilities by a significant margin. This places the construction either in the far future, which is not a helpful answer, or in the past, specifically in the era known as the Dark Age of Technology, roughly the 15th through 25th millennia, the period before the Age of Strife, when humanity was at the height of its technological achievement. The Dark Age of Technology is, in the 40K setting, the greatest period of human civilization that has ever existed. Humanity had colonized vast swaths of the galaxy. Human technology had reached levels that the current Imperium regards with a combination of reverence and terror. The Men of Iron, sentient artificial intelligences, were created and destroyed during this period. Warp travel was mastered to a degree that enabled regular, reliable interstellar commerce and communication. Mega-engineering projects like the construction of Romulus-class star forts were routine undertakings. The knowledge base of the Dark Age of Technology dwarfs anything that survives in the 41st millennium, and much of what was lost during the Age of Strife and the Horus Heresy that followed has never been recovered. If the vault was built during the Dark Age of Technology, then its construction capabilities make complete sense. The impossible alloy, the self-sustaining power source, the pathogen of extraordinary precision, all of these fit within the parameters of what Dark Age humanity could produce. And the timing fits the evidence. A structure built during the Dark Age of Technology would have been placed in position before the Age of Strife began isolating regions of the galaxy from each other, before the heresy tore the Imperium apart, before the long darkness that followed. Whoever built the vault, they built it with knowledge of what was coming. Not just general knowledge that things would get worse. The galaxy of the Dark Age of Technology already had its tensions and its threats. Specific knowledge, knowledge of the Jericho Reach's future isolation, knowledge of the Hive Fleet that would arrive there 250 years before it did, knowledge of the Tau, a species that did not yet have spaceflight capability in the Dark Age of Technology, a species that was essentially irrelevant at that point in history, but which the Vault's operations appear to have anticipated. The star charts that guided the Tau into the Jericho Reach may, if the theory that someone specifically directed the Tau there has merit, have been made by the same minds that built the Vault. This level of foreknowledge is not standard human precognition. Even the most powerful psychers in the Imperium's history, the Emperor himself, who sits on the Golden Throne and whose psychic power is beyond anything else in the human species, do not consistently produce accurate prophecy at the level of specificity and timeline accuracy that the Vault implies. Correct tactical battle plans for a specific alien fleet 250 years in advance, with the fleet correctly named and characterized. This is not vague prophetic vision. This is knowledge. There are two ways to interpret this. The first is that the builders of the Vault had access to precognitive capability at a scale and precision that simply does not occur naturally, and that they were able to systematically produce and encode actionable foreknowledge in a way that has no parallel in recorded history. This possibility is not impossible, but it requires accepting that a level of psychic capability existed in the Dark Age of Technology that surpasses anything currently understood. The second interpretation, the one that the Chamber of Vigilance treats as more credible, though they approach it with appropriate caution, is that the builders had access to information about the future, not because they could see it, but because they could influence it. If the Jericho Reach's future was not simply predicted but partially designed, if the events that the Vault prepared for were set in motion by the same people who built the Vault, then the Vault is not a prophetic gift, but an operational component. The architects of this plan did not look at the future and see Hive Fleet Dagon arriving in the Jericho Reach. They arranged for Hive Fleet Dagon to arrive in the Jericho Reach at the right time as part of a larger design that required the Tyranid fleet's presence to produce the ultimate outcome they were aiming for. This is a deeply unsettling interpretation. It implies that human beings in the Dark Age of Technology were capable of manipulating the movements of Tyranid hive fleets. It implies that the current war in the Jericho Reach, the deaths, the lost worlds, the extraordinary cost in human lives, is, at some level, planned. It implies that the Vault's builders considered this acceptable, that the price was worth paying for whatever the final outcome is supposed to be. But the alternative, that someone simply predicted all of this correctly, with this level of detail, this far in advance, is arguably more disturbing, because it implies that the future is fixed. That no matter what choices are made, what sacrifices are offered, what heroism is displayed, the events of the Jericho Reach were always going to happen exactly this way, which makes every life lost in the Achilles Crusade not a tragedy of circumstance, but a predetermined element of someone else's plan. Neither interpretation is comfortable. Both lead to the same place. The vault's innermost chamber, and whatever is inside it, was always the end point. Everything else is the journey. The Emperor question is perhaps the most charged element of the who built it discussion, and also the most carefully handled in Deathwatch documentation. The evidence that could be interpreted as pointing to the Emperor as the vault's architect is substantial. The door's inscription depicts him. The inscription names him. The vault's name, Omega, echoes his designation of himself in the pre-heresy era, the last letter of the Greek alphabet suggesting not just an end but the end, the final statement. The vault's design philosophy, the long preparation, the gift at the right moment, the refusal to intervene more than is necessary, is consistent with how the Emperor is described as operating in other contexts. The Grey Knights, the Custodians, the Webway Project beneath the Imperial Palace, all of these are Emperor-attributed preparations for future crises, built in secret, revealed when needed. The Emperor had, at the height of his power, capabilities that were not widely understood even by his closest servants. His psychic power was of a scale that made standard measures of psychic ability irrelevant. His knowledge of the warp and of history was such that he could anticipate threats that no ordinary strategist would recognize. His willingness to make long-term preparations, measured in millennia, not years, is documented in the setting's canon. If the Emperor built the Omega Vault before the heresy, during the period when he was still physically active and at the height of his capability, then he would have done so with the knowledge that he would not be available to manage it directly. The heresy was coming. He would be bound to the Golden Throne. The work he left behind would have to function without him, guided only by the preparations he had made. This is exactly what the Vault does. It functions without its builder. It has been doing so for 10,000 years. Whether this is the Emperor or someone else, whether it is a group of individuals rather than a single mind, whether there are human fingerprints here that belong to figures whose names we do not know, the Vault's existence testifies to a level of strategic thinking that operates on timescales that make conventional military planning look like drawing in sand before the tide. Section 9, The Inner Vault. Secret of Secrets. The innermost chamber has never been seen, but everything about the vault points toward it with such insistence, such accumulated weight of implication, that the absence of direct observation does not feel like ignorance so much as anticipation. We know what surrounds it. We know what it has cost. We know what the Chamber of Vigilance believes it contains, and we know why they believe it. We are standing outside a door that is almost open, and the question is not really what is inside. The question is whether we are ready for it. The Chamber of Vigilance's characterization of the innermost chamber's key tenets is recorded in multiple documents across different periods of the Vault's operational history, and the wording is notably consistent. The final truth and the last weapon. These are not casual phrases. They are the product of extended deliberation by people who choose their words carefully, who understand that imprecise language about something this important could be worse than silence. Final truth, not a truth, not the latest truth, not an important truth, the final truth. The word final implies a sequence, a progression, that there have been other truths, that those truths were partial or preparatory, that they were leading toward this. The Vault's gifts over the centuries have included truths of various kinds. The truth about the Genestealer cult in the Broken Spear, the truth about an unreachable location in the Data Crystal, the truth about Hive Fleet Dagon in the Scrolls. Each of these was a truth. None of them was the final one. The final truth is apparently something categorically different, something that the other truths were, in some sense, building up to, either by providing context for understanding it or by creating conditions under which it could be used. Last weapon, again, the word last, is doing significant work. Not a powerful weapon, not a unique weapon, not a weapon unlike anything currently available. The last weapon. The implication is that after this weapon, there is nothing else. Not because the Vault has nothing more to give, but because this weapon is the response to something that all other weapons are insufficient against. The xenocidal pathogen could be considered a weapon of extraordinary scale. The Broken Spear's revelation enabled the destruction of a Genestealer cult. The Dagon Scrolls provided tools for fighting a Hive fleet. All of these could be described as weapons in the broadest sense, but they were not the last weapon. The last weapon is something else, something beyond category, something that the final truth is required to understand, and that nothing in the Vault's history so far has been. The locks on the innermost chamber are the Vault's own schedule. They have been falling in a pattern that correlates with the Jericho Reach's most significant events. Not one-to-one, not with the mechanical precision of a detonator countdown, but with the organic rhythm of a plan reaching maturity. A lock fell when the Achilles Crusade was launched. Another fell when Hive Fleet Dagon arrived. Another fell when the chaos forces of the Hadex anomaly broke through a critical defensive line and threatened to destabilize the Crusade's entire rear. The locks do not fall in response to victories. They fall in response to escalations, moments when the situation in the Reach reaches a new level of severity, when the Vault's assessment of the crisis threshold crosses another mark. This pattern tells us something about the innermost chamber's contents. The final truth and the last weapon are not solutions to manageable problems. They are responses to a situation that has reached a specific threshold of severity, a threshold that the Vault's builders anticipated, that they calibrated the lock mechanism to recognize, and that they believed would eventually be reached. The Vault does not open its innermost chamber until the situation is bad enough to require what is inside. The situation has been approaching that threshold for 200 years of crusade and three-front war, and the threshold is almost crossed. The nature of the final truth has been the subject of extensive theorizing within the Chamber of Vigilance, and the theories that have been developed are not independent speculations. They are systematic analyses of everything the Vault has given, everything the Jericho Reach contains, everything the Vault's inscription implies, looking for a coherent picture of what the final piece must be. The most compelling structural analysis that the Chamber has produced goes like this. Every truth the Vault has provided was actionable in a specific context. There was always something that could be done with it. The Broken Spear led to action against the Genestealer cult. The battle plans led to action against Hive Fleet Dagon. Even the data crystal with the dangerous coordinates led to action, though the action was not to go to those coordinates, but to know they exist and stay away. All of the Vault's truths have been operational truths, things that informed what the Death Watch should do next. The final truth, under this analysis, is the operational truth for the endgame. It is the truth about what the entire situation in the Jericho Reach is actually about. Not Hive Fleet Dagon in isolation, not the Hadex anomaly in isolation, not the Tau with their mysterious star charts in isolation. The final truth is the explanation of all three together, the underlying reality that connects all three threats and explains why they have all converged on this region at this time. And once the Death Watch understands that underlying reality, the last weapon is the means by which they address it. There is one specific candidate for what that underlying reality might be, and the Chamber of Vigilance has written about it with obvious discomfort. The Hadex anomaly is not simply a warp storm. It is, in their working theory, a construction, something built or maintained by an intelligence that exists within it. If that intelligence, whatever it is, a demon, a chaos entity, something without a convenient category, is the root cause of the Jericho Reach's situation, then every other threat in the region might be secondary. The Tyranids might be drawn toward the Reach by the psychic emanations of the anomaly. The Tau might have been directed here by someone who understood that their presence would complicate the Imperial response. The chaos forces that emerge from the anomaly might be not the primary threat, but the distraction, the mechanism by which the intelligence inside it keeps the Imperium's attention fragmented. If this is the shape of the final truth, that there is a single specific thing inside the Hadex anomaly that is the root cause of all the Reach's problems, a thing that can be identified and addressed by the last weapon, then the Vault's entire operational history makes complete sense. Every gift was a preparation for addressing that thing. Every piece of information, every weapon, every resource was building toward a force and a strategy capable of taking the fight to what lives inside the anomaly and ending it. This is what the Chamber of Vigilance believes. They believe the innermost chamber contains the identity of the thing inside the anomaly and the weapon designed to kill it. They believe the Vault will open when the Death Watch is positioned to act on that revelation. And they believe, with the quiet certainty of people who have spent their lives studying the evidence for it, that the moment is almost here. The last lock falls alone in the dark. Nobody is present when it happens. The bell rings, the vault opens, and then, for the first time in the entire operational history of Watch Fortress Ariok, the Death Watch walks all the way inside. Section 10. The Great Theories. Every great mystery in a setting as rich and layered as Warhammer 40,000 accumulates theories the way a ship accumulates barnacles, steadily, inevitably, and with an occasional specimen that turns out to be genuinely extraordinary on closer inspection. The Omega Vault is no exception. What follows is not a catalog of fan speculation, though fan speculation is part of the picture. This is a structured examination of the most coherent, evidence-supported theories about the Vault's true nature, its builders, its purpose, and the identity of what waits inside the innermost chamber. I want to give each of these theories the weight they deserve, because dismissing any of them too quickly would be intellectually dishonest. Each one makes sense given a specific reading of the available evidence. Each one points toward a different understanding of what the Vault ultimately means. The Omegan Theory. This is the theory that has attracted the most sustained attention, perhaps because it involves one of the most genuinely compelling mysteries in the entire 40K setting. Omegan is one half of the dual Primarch identity of the 20th Legion, the Alpha Legion, where his twin Alfarius presented a public face to the galaxy, commanding the Legion, meeting with other Primarchs, engaging in the diplomatic and military activities that required a visible presence. Omegan was the hidden one, the shadow, the aspect of the Legion's leadership that operated beneath the surface of observable events. The Alpha Legion is defined by misdirection. Their tactical doctrine emphasizes deception, infiltration, long-term planning, and the use of assets that nobody knows they have until the moment they are deployed. The Legion symbol is the Hydra, a serpent, or rather a many-headed serpent, that grows new heads when one is cut off. Their philosophy of war is the complete antithesis of direct confrontation. You do not fight your enemy, you make the battlefield something your enemy cannot understand. And then you win on a battlefield that only exists in your head. Now look at the door inscription again. The Emperor is strangling a serpent, not killing it with a weapon, strangling it with his bare hands in a grip that suggests the act is personal, intimate, and definitive. The serpent is coiled, which is the classic posture of the snake preparing to strike, but also of the snake that has been caught and is trying to escape. The Alpha Legion symbol is a serpent. The Legion that is defined by secrets and deception is symbolized by the coiling serpent, and the door of the Omega Vault shows the Emperor strangling exactly that image. The Vault's name is Omega, Omegon. The last letter of the Greek alphabet is the defining syllable of the hidden Primarch's name. Whether this is coincidence, the Vault was built for other reasons and simply happened to acquire a name that matches the hidden Primarch, or intention, the Vault's name is a signpost pointing at what it contains, is a question that the evidence does not definitively resolve. What it would mean if Omegon is inside the Vault. After the Horus Heresy, the Alpha Legion's allegiance was essentially indeterminate. Alfarius was killed by Robute Guillemon, though even this is contested, because nothing about the Alpha Legion is straightforward and the death of Alfarius may have been staged. And Omegon's fate is not recorded in any surviving document. He simply disappears from the historical record. Given the Alpha Legion's capabilities and habits, this disappearance could mean almost anything. He could be dead. He could be operating somewhere that no Imperial intelligence asset has been able to find. He could be inside the Vault. If Omegon is inside the Vault, in stasis, preserved, waiting, then he is the last weapon. A Primarch is, militarily, genuinely extraordinary. Organisms of physically superhuman capability, centuries of accumulated tactical genius, and in Omegon's case, the specific expertise of the Alpha Legion's approach to warfare. Against a situation that no conventional force can address, something inside the Hadex anomaly that the Death Watch's kill teams alone cannot reach, a Primarch would represent a qualitatively different capability. The xenocidal pathogen makes a peculiar kind of sense in this context, if you follow the theory through. A pathogen that kills everything except baseline humanity would not harm a Primarch. Primarchs are not baseline humans. They are something else, something that emerged from the Emperor's genetic programs. but their connection to the human genome is close enough that such a pathogen might be calibrated to spare them. This is speculation, but it fits the pattern. The final truth under this theory is the identity of Omegon and the circumstances of his presence here. The last weapon is Omegon himself, and the inscription, "The Emperor strangling the serpent," is not a triumphant image of the Emperor defeating the Alpha Legion. It is a covenant. The Emperor holds the serpent not to kill it, but to keep it, to control it, to deploy it at the right moment. The hidden Primarch has been held in reserve, in the Emperor's grip, for 10,000 years. The Emperor's long plan theory. This theory is less dramatic in its specifics, but more profound in its implications, and it connects the vault to the broader pattern of the Emperor's preparations for the long future of humanity. The Emperor's preparations before the heresy are documented extensively in the setting's canon. The Grey Knights, a secret chapter created specifically to fight demons, using a different genocide than the standard Space Marine process, were prepared in advance of the heresy by the Emperor personally. The Custodians were established as the personal guard of the throne, specifically because the Emperor foresaw a future where he would need people he could absolutely trust, in absolute proximity to his most vulnerable form. The Webway project beneath the Imperial Palace was the Emperor's attempt to create a secure alternative to warp travel that would not expose humanity to the entities that exist in the warp. All of these preparations share a common trait. They were designed to function after the Emperor was incapacitated. He was building mechanisms that would not require his direct guidance, that would operate according to their design even in his absence, that would do the right thing at the right moment, without needing him to be present and functional to direct them. The Omega Vault fits this pattern perfectly. It is a mechanism designed to operate in the Emperor's absence. It gives the right thing at the right moment. It has been doing so for 10,000 years, without anyone needing to manage it. It is exactly the kind of long-range preparation that the Emperor, at the height of his power, and with the foreknowledge that he was about to be incapacitated for an indefinite period, would have built. Under this theory, the final truth is the truth that the Emperor needs his servants to know in order to address the Jericho Reach's root problem, the Hadex anomaly, or whatever is inside it. And the last weapon is the specific tool he prepared to address that problem, designed with complete knowledge of what the problem would be and what would be needed to solve it. The depth of foresight this implies, building a complete solution to a problem 10,000 years before the solution would be needed, is consistent with what the setting says about the Emperor's psychic capability at its height. He was described as being able to look forward across great expanses of time, to see possible futures with a clarity that no other psyker could match. If any being in the setting's history could have built the Omega Vault with the intention and the knowledge that it implies, the Emperor is the most plausible candidate. The terrible truth theory. This is the most philosophically interesting of the major theories, and in some ways the most disturbing, because it doesn't require any specific identity for the vault's builder or contents. It focuses instead on the character of the final truth, and asks, what if the reason the vault was designed not to open until the last possible moment is because the truth inside it would be catastrophic to know? Consider what the Imperium of Man is built on. It is built on faith. The Imperial Creed, the worship of the Emperor as a god, the narrative of humanity as a chosen species fighting for its survival against a hostile universe under the protection of a divine figure, all of this is the foundational ideology of a civilization of 1,000,000 worlds. It is the thing that gets soldiers out of bed in the morning and onto the battlefield. It is the thing that keeps administrators in their posts and tech adepts maintaining the machines of war, and astropaths sending messages through a medium that is actively trying to kill them. The faith of the Imperium is the mortar between the stones of its civilization. What if the final truth undermines the faith? Not in a crude way, not a revelation that the Emperor was a fraudulent human who made up the whole thing. The Emperor's power is real. His sacrifice on the Golden Throne is real. His role in creating the Space Marines and fighting the heresy is real. But there are truths adjacent to these realities that, if widely known, would corrode the faith that sustains the Imperium in ways that could be more destructive than any military defeat. What if the Emperor did not die for humanity, but is simply trapped? What if the Golden Throne is not a sacred vigil, but a mechanical failure, a technology that was supposed to be temporary, and has become permanent because nobody knows how to fix it? What if the Emperor cannot guide humanity because he is not conscious, not aware, but simply generating psychic power by some reflex that does not require awareness? These are questions that the Imperium's faithful are not supposed to ask, but they are questions that have answers. And some of those answers are not comforting. Or consider something more operationally specific to the Jericho Reach. What if the final truth is about the nature of the chaos entities inside the Hadex anomaly, its true identity, its true history, its true relationship to humanity? And that truth is one that would break the faith of anyone who learned it? What if the thing inside the anomaly is connected to the Imperium's own history in ways that implicate its most sacred narratives? Under the terrible truth theory, the vault was designed to protect the Imperium from the final truth, until the moment when knowing it was necessary for survival, until the moment when the cost of not knowing was definitively greater than the cost of knowing. The locks have been falling not because the situation is bad enough to require the weapon, but because it is bad enough to survive the truth. When the final lock falls, the Death Watch will learn something that cannot be unlearned, and the world they have been operating in will become permanently different. This theory does not require the weapon to be a physical object. The last weapon might be the truth itself, the specific actionable knowledge of what the thing inside the anomaly is, which, once known and understood, reveals how it can be destroyed. Knowledge as weapon. Understanding as strategy. The Vault's entire gift-giving history has been about this, providing knowledge that enables action. The final truth is simply the knowledge that enables the final action, the one toward which all the others were preparations. The Alpha Legion's own game. There is a fourth theory, smaller and more speculative than the others, but worth considering because it speaks to something real about the 40K setting's treatment of complexity and hidden agendas. What if the Vault was not built by the Emperor, or, with the Emperor's knowledge, but by the Alpha Legion, specifically by Omegon, as a preparation for a goal that the Alpha Legion identified as worth achieving, but could not achieve through conventional means? The Alpha Legion's overall strategic picture in the 40K setting is genuinely ambiguous. They ostensibly fell to chaos during the heresy, but their actual behavior does not consistently fit the profile of a chaos-worshipping warband. They are sometimes described as pursuing an agenda of their own that may not align either with the Imperium or with the Chaos powers, an agenda inherited from their interaction with the Cabal, a xenological organization that believed the only way to truly defeat chaos was to ensure the victory of Horus in the heresy, because a chaos-dominated galaxy would eventually consume itself, where a surviving Imperium would simply perpetuate the long war indefinitely. Under this theory, the Vault is an Alpha Legion asset. The serpent on the door is not the Alpha Legion being strangled by the Emperor. It is the Alpha Legion holding a secret that even the Emperor cannot pry from its hands. The Vault was built as part of a long-game Alpha Legion operation, with goals that the Death Watch, discovering the Vault's contents, will only partly understand. The final truth is not the Emperor's plan, but the Alpha Legion's. And the last weapon is something the Legion prepared not for the Imperium's benefit, but for a goal the Legion identified as necessary, a goal that may or may not align with what the Chamber of Vigilance hopes for. This theory requires accepting that the Alpha Legion had capabilities in the dark age of technology that even the Emperor did not know about, which is a large requirement. But the Alpha Legion's defining characteristic is secrets, and their defining tool is the long game. A vault prepared in the dark age of technology to deliver a specific payload in the late 41st millennium is exactly the kind of thing an organization defined by patience and misdirection might build. Section 11. Why nobody opens it. We have been circling this question since the beginning, and now it is time to answer it directly. Not the mechanical answer, because no one can find the mechanism, but the real answer. The answer that the vault itself, by its design and behavior, has been giving across 10,000 years of operation. Nobody opens the Omega Vault because it was not designed to be opened. Let that sit for a moment before unpacking it, because it sounds paradoxical. The vault opens. We have spent this entire exploration documenting what it gives, and how it gives it, and when it gives it. The vault opens regularly, but there is a profound difference between a structure that opens itself and a structure that is opened. The distinction is not semantic. It is the entire point. A structure that is opened is passive. It contains things, and human agency operates upon it to access those things. The humans decide when they need what it contains, and how much of it, and for what purpose. The humans are in control. A structure that opens itself is not passive, it is an agent. It decides when to give and what to give and how much and in what sequence. The humans receive. They do not control. And this was a deliberate design choice, perhaps the most important design choice in the entire vault's construction. Think about what the vault's designer knew. They knew, through whatever combination of precognition, foresight, calculation, and temporal awareness they possessed, that the contents of the vault would be needed across a span of thousands of years, in a sequence determined not by human desire, but by the actual requirements of a situation that would unfold in ways too complex for any force except the vault itself to track reliably. They knew that if they gave humans control over the vault's opening, human beings would open it too early, or they would open the wrong chamber for the wrong crisis, or they would take everything out at once, trying to prepare for everything simultaneously, and destroy the vault's carefully staged delivery system. Or they would be corrupted by chaos, by alien influence, by simple ambition, and use the vault's contents for purposes other than the ones they were designed for. Human agency, in the context of an asset this important, with an operational timeline this long, is a vulnerability. It introduces error. It introduces the possibility of premature disclosure, of misdirected use, of the final weapon being deployed before the final truth is understood. The vault was designed to remove human agency from its most critical function, precisely because the stakes were too high to risk the errors that human agency inevitably produces. This is not a cynical view of humanity. It is a realistic one. The same mind that trusted humanity enough to build an extraordinary gift-giving machine, specifically for humanity's benefit, also understood humanity's limitations well enough to design around them. The vault does not open itself because its builder thought humans were unreliable. The vault opens itself because its builder thought the task was too important to risk on human reliability at any given moment. The Death Watch, over the centuries, has not failed to find the mechanism because they are insufficiently capable or insufficiently motivated. They have failed to find it because there is no mechanism to find in the sense they are looking for. The vault's opening condition is not a lock combination or a genetic key or an access code. It is a state of affairs, a specific configuration of external reality that the vault is monitoring and waiting for. When the configuration is reached, the vault opens. When it is not, the vault does not. No amount of engineering or scholarship can substitute for the actual state of affairs being what the vault requires it to be. This has a profound implication for the question of why the innermost chamber has never opened. The innermost chamber requires a state of affairs that, as of the most recent documented period in the Jericho Reach's history, has not yet been fully reached. The last locks are still falling. The situation is still developing. The vault is watching, monitoring, assessing, and it is not yet determined that the specific conditions required for the final opening have been met. When those conditions are met, when the crisis in the Jericho Reach reaches the precise threshold that the vault's parameters identify as requiring the final truth and the last weapon, the chamber will open. The vault does not withhold what is inside the innermost chamber out of cruelty or caution in the human sense of those words. It withholds it because the gift would be meaningless, or counterproductive, or dangerous before the conditions for its meaningful use are present. Giving battle plans for Hive Fleet Dagon 8,000 years early would not have helped. The Death Watch could not have acted on them, and they would have been lost or corrupted or misunderstood across the intervening centuries. The timing of each gift is as important as the gift itself, and the vault has been calibrating both. There is also a second level of the answer, which is darker and requires acknowledging something uncomfortable about the nature of the vault's operation. Nobody opens the Omega Vault because the vault does not want to be opened by anyone other than itself. This is not metaphor. The vault demonstrates something that can only be described as agency and preference. It opens when it chooses. It gives what it chooses to give. It has, in the documented history of its operation, consistently resisted all attempts to access it outside of its own operational parameters. The void shielding that protects the door is not simply strong. It is, by the accounts of the tech adepts who have studied it, stronger than it should need to be against any force the Death Watch could bring to bear. The vault is not protected against the Death Watch specifically. It is protected against anyone, against anything. If you consider the vault as having something like a will, and the evidence for this, while circumstantial, is substantial, then the will it expresses through its operational behavior is the will of its builder, patient, long-sighted, absolutely confident that the timing matters as much as the content. The vault is not waiting to be opened. It is waiting for the right moment to give what it has always intended to give, to the people it has always intended to give it to, in service of the outcome it was built to achieve. The Death Watch's role in this picture is not incidental. They are the vault's hands, the mechanism by which its gifts are transformed from stored potential into actual effects in the world. But they are not the vault's master. They cannot be. The vault's master is whoever built it 10,000 years ago, and that person has been gone for 10,000 years, and their will is expressed through the vault's operation. And that is enough. It has been enough for 10,000 years. It will be enough for whatever comes next. This is, when you look at it directly, one of the most remarkable things in the entire Warhammer 40,000 setting. Not a weapon that survives the ages, not an institution that preserves knowledge across the millennia, a plan that has been executing itself for 10,000 years, adapting to circumstances its builder never personally witnessed, delivering exactly what is needed at exactly the right moment, through an instrument of self-operation that removes human error from the most critical junctures while still relying on human agency to act on what it provides. That is the answer to why nobody opens the Omega Vault, not because they can't, not because they haven't tried, but because the vault is not theirs to open. It was never theirs to open. It belongs to a plan, and the plan opens it when the plan requires it to be open. What the Death Watch provides is not access, but readiness. The vault's builder didn't need guardians who could open the vault. They needed guardians who would be ready when the vault opened itself, ready to receive what came out, ready to understand it, ready to act on it effectively, ready to have spent 10,000 years becoming exactly the right kind of force for exactly this moment. Watch Fortress Ariok and the institution that has guarded it are not incidental to the vault's operation. They are part of it. The Death Watch is the weapon's delivery mechanism as much as the weapon itself. Whatever the vault ultimately gives, whatever the final truth turns out to be, whatever the last weapon actually is, will not operate alone. It will operate through human hands. It will operate through the warriors who have stood in the corridors of an impossible fortress and waited, generation after generation, decade after decade, in the shadow of a door 40 paces high and not opened it, because it was not theirs to open, because it belongs to the moment that is coming. Section 12. The Last Vigil. We have come a long way from that door with the Emperor strangling the serpent. We started with a physical object, a cylinder of adamantine and void shielding, a door 40 paces high, a bell that rings when it closes, and we have followed the implications outward until they touch the deepest structures of the 40K setting's mythology, the nature of the Emperor's preparations, the meaning of the Alpha Legion's hidden Primarch, the question of whether the future is fixed or free, the nature of genuine sacrifice, and what it means to wait for a plan to bear fruit across 10,000 years of war. There is something that the Omega Vault does to you when you spend time with it, and I think that something is intentional. Intentional both on the part of the Vault's fictional builder and on the part of the writers who created it as a piece of lore. The Vault is designed to provoke a specific kind of reflection. It asks, what would you sacrifice if you knew it would eventually matter? Not if you knew the outcome, not if the plan worked, but if you were building something that would take 10,000 years to reach its completion, that would cost countless lives in its operation, that you yourself would never live to see succeed. Could you make that investment with full knowledge of the cost? Could you seal the most important thing you had ever made inside a cylinder of imperishable metal and trust that the universe would present the right moment for it to give what it contained? The Deathwatch warriors who guard the vault have spent their lives in proximity to that question. The ones who think about it, and there are many, because the Deathwatch selects for warriors who are capable of extended contemplation as well as extreme violence, arrive at a particular kind of understanding that is rare in the Imperium of Man, where the standard mode is desperate reaction rather than patient preparation. They understand that the universe operates on timescales that human lives barely register. They understand that individual sacrifice, even enormous institutional sacrifice, can be meaningful not immediately, but across a span of time that no individual witness will observe. They understand that a plan is not invalidated by the deaths of those who execute it. This is, in the grim darkness of the far future, an act of extraordinary optimism. Not the naive optimism of believing things will work out because things always work out. The earned optimism of understanding that things work out when someone makes them work out, across time, through preparation, through sacrifice, through the patience to trust a mechanism that you cannot control, and that will give what it gives when it decides to give it. The Jericho Reach, in the late 41st millennium, is one of the most contested and desperate regions in the entire Imperium. 3 threats, 1 campaign, more dead than any accounting fully captures. Worlds consumed, systems lost, populations exterminated or corrupted or absorbed. The Achilles Crusade has been fighting for 2 centuries, and the situation, by many measures, has not improved. It has simply changed, from one configuration of catastrophe to another. In this environment, the Omega Vault is both literal and symbolic. Literally, it is a resource that has provided the Death Watch with specific tools and information that have made specific differences in specific crises. The broken spear that revealed the Genestealer cult, the battle plans that gave the Orpheus Salient tactical options against Hive Fleet Dagon, the gifts that have not yet been fully understood. These are real things. They have mattered. Symbolically, the Vault is the promise that someone thought this region, this moment, this crisis was worth preparing for, that the suffering and the loss are not random, that there is a shape to what is happening, a shape that was anticipated, that was prepared against, that will resolve in a specific way when the final lock falls and the bell rings one last time and the Death Watch walks all the way inside. Whether that promise is fulfilled, whether the final truth proves to be the truth the Chamber of Vigilance believes it is, whether the last weapon proves capable of what they need it to be capable of, whether the plan that began in the dark age of technology reaches the completion its architect intended, that is the question that the Jericho Reach campaign, in the lore of Warhammer 40,000, is building toward. It is also, of course, a question that the lore does not definitively answer. The Omega Vault exists as an open-ended mystery, deliberately so. Games Workshop and the writers who have contributed to the Death Watch's lore have provided the outer structure of the mystery. The Vault's existence, its operational history, its gifts, the falling locks, the nature of the innermost chamber, and they have left the final revelation open. The innermost chamber is a narrative potential, not a narrative fact. What it contains is what the story needs it to contain when the story finally asks that question. This is, as a piece of world building, remarkable and knowing. The Vault has been designed as a mystery that mirrors its own in-world function. It provides what it provides when the story requires it, and it withholds the final answer until the moment the answer would be most powerful. The Vault and the story about the Vault operate by the same principle. Both are waiting for the right moment. Both will open when they are ready. In the meantime, there is the fortress in the dark. There are the warriors in their black armor, standing in corridors older than the Imperium they serve, waiting for a bell they have heard before to ring one last time. There is a door 40 paces high with the image of a man strangling a serpent and the words that have stood above it for longer than anyone alive can remember. And the last fortress is truth. The vigil continues. The locks are almost gone. And somewhere in the deep mathematics of a plan 10,000 years in the making, the final calculation is almost complete. If you've made it to the end of this one, thank you, genuinely. The Omega Vault is one of those pieces of 40K lore that rewards patience, and I think you just proved you have it. If you want to talk about this, the theories, the timeline, what you think is inside that innermost chamber, drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and the theories that come out of a community of people who care about this setting are often better than anything I manage on my own. Hit subscribe if this is the kind of content you want to see more of. It does more for the channel than you might think. Until next time, the watch continues. Supplemental depth. The silence between openings, one of the aspects of the Omega Vault that tends to get less attention than the dramatic events of its openings is the experience of the long silences between them. These silences are, in many ways, as important to the Vault's character as the gifts themselves. They are where the Death Watch actually lives. Imagine being the watch commander at Ariok during a period of Vault silence that stretches for decades. You have the Chronicle in your hands. You know what the Vault has given before. You know what happened to the astropath who delivered the 2-word message. You know about the pathogen in its sealed container, the battle plans that named a fleet that hadn't arrived yet, the broken spear that led to the destruction of a Genestealer cult across a journey of months and contingencies that nobody could have predicted. You know all of this. And you come to the Vault's housing chamber every morning, or whatever passes for morning in the perpetual artificial lighting of a deep space fortress, and you stand in front of a door 40 paces high, and you wait. The Vault is silent. The Jericho Reach is not silent. The Akaros salient is grinding forward through chaos-touched systems, where the very ground sometimes tries to eat the soldiers advancing across it. The Canis salient is managing the diplomatic and military chess game against a Tau expeditionary force that is patient, intelligent, and never quite where your intelligence reports predicted. The Orpheus salient is fighting a Tyranid fleet that does not make mistakes, that does not retreat, that does not negotiate, that simply consumes. Somewhere in all of this, there is a situation that the Vault has the resources to help with. You believe this. The Vault's history gives you every reason to believe this. But the Vault is silent. This is the vigil in its most demanding form, not the dramatic moments of opening and receipt and deployment. The vigil is this: standing before something you cannot control, trusting that it will act when it should, conducting the best operations you can with the tools you currently have, not crossing the line into trying to force the Vault to give what you need before it is ready to give it. There are documented cases, not many, but some, of watch commanders who broke under the strain of this. Not visibly. Space Marines do not have breakdowns in the clinical sense. But there are records of watch commanders who began to overinterpret the Vault's silence, who began to see patterns in its external surface that weren't there, who developed an obsession with finding the opening mechanism that consumed progressively more of their attention and judgment. In every such case, the watch commander was eventually replaced, sometimes voluntarily, stepping down when they recognized what was happening to them, sometimes by the Chamber of Vigilance acting on observations that their commander had lost perspective. The Vault does something to people. Extended proximity to something ancient and patient and operating according to principles you cannot fully understand. It changes the way you think, gradually, the way long exposure to any powerful thing changes you. The Death Watch at Ariok develops a particular kind of personality over time, those who last, the veterans who have been there long enough to have multiple Vault openings in their personal experience. They become quieter than the warriors of other chapters, not less capable. Their combat record is extraordinary, but quieter, more comfortable with waiting, more likely to pause before acting, to ask whether this is the moment to act or the moment to hold. Their battle brothers from other institutions sometimes find this quality unnerving, reading it as hesitation where it is actually something more refined, the ability to distinguish between the right moment and merely the current moment. The Vault teaches this without speaking. It teaches it simply by existing, by being what it is, patient beyond human scale, accurate beyond human prediction, committed to a timeline that no individual witness will fully observe. You cannot spend years in its presence without some of that patience transferring to you. The senior members of the Chamber of Vigilance, by the end of long careers at Ariok, have a relationship with time that is genuinely different from the standard Imperial officers' relationship. They think in decades as easily as most people think in weeks. They plan operational timelines measured in years with the same practical comfort that another general might apply to planning a 6-month campaign. They have, through exposure to the Vault's operation, internalized the reality that the most important decisions may not produce visible results on any timescale that human beings naturally track. You make the right choice now, and you trust that the correctness of the choice will manifest across a time frame you may not live to observe. This is, in many respects, the most significant thing the Vault has given the Death Watch. Not any specific gift, not any particular piece of information or physical resource, but the capacity for this quality of thought. The Vault has made the Death Watch at Ariok into a force capable of operating on the same time scale as the crisis they are responding to. A force that thinks in millennia, even if the individuals within it only live for centuries. The institutional memory encoded in the Chronicle, passed from Watch Commander to Watch Commander, creates a continuity of perspective that is genuinely unusual in the Imperium, and that is directly attributable to what the Vault has asked of those who guard it. This also illuminates the choice to use the Death Watch as the Vault's guardians, rather than, say, the Adeptus Custodes or the Grey Knights or some other elite force. The custodians are magnificent warriors and deeply loyal, but their orientation is toward the Emperor on the throne. Their patience is patience in service of that vigil, and their operational instinct is defensive rather than expeditionary. The Grey Knights fight a very specific kind of enemy, and their specialist focus makes them less adaptable in the kind of multi-threat environment the Jericho Reach represents. The Death Watch, with its multi-chapter composition, its xenological expertise, its expeditionary character, and its specific training for exactly the kind of diverse, unpredictable threats that the Jericho Reach contains, and with the psychological shaping that proximity to the vault produces over time, is precisely the right instrument for this role. Someone understood this. Someone thought carefully about what kind of force would need to be present at the vault's location across millennia of operation, and designed the circumstances that would produce that force, and position the vault where that force would serve a dual function, guarding the vault and fighting the war that the vault exists to resolve. The Death Watch doesn't just protect the Omega Vault. In a very real sense, the Omega Vault is the Death Watch's reason for existing in the Jericho Reach, and the Jericho Reach campaign is the forge that has made the Death Watch into exactly the kind of organization that can use what the Vault will eventually give. Supplemental depth, what the bell sounds like. A meditation on witness. Let's slow down and think about what it actually means to be present when the vault opens. You are a Space Marine seconded to watch Fortress Ariok. You have been here for 11 years. You have participated in 47 kill team deployments across the Jericho Reach, 3 in the Akaros salient against Chaos forces, 9 against the Tau expansion in what is technically the Canis salient's operational zone, the remainder in the Orpheus salient where the Tyranid advance has been consuming systems for the past several decades at a rate that the logistics charts make look like slow strangulation. You have lost 4 battle brothers from your kill team. You have personally killed things that you do not have names for in any language you speak, things that your training prepared you for in the abstract, but that your senses still required time to process when you encountered them in reality. You have been in the Vault's housing chamber twice. The first time, during your initial orientation at Ariok, when the chaplain brought all new arrivals to stand before the door and understand what they were here to guard. The second time, 3 years into your posting, when a senior watch captain asked you to accompany a study team that was cataloging the door's exterior markings for the 147th time, looking for features that previous catalogers might have missed. You found nothing new. The door did not care that you were looking. On a night that you do not initially understand is significant, a night that feels identical to the other nights of your service here, you are in the lower meditation corridor that runs parallel to the vault's outer structure when you hear the bell. The sound arrives not through the air, but through the metal, through the floor under your feet, through the walls, through the very structure of the fortress. It comes from everywhere at once, which is impossible for a sound emanating from a single source. But this is what you experience. For approximately 4 seconds, the sound exists as the most real thing in your immediate reality. Not louder than your thoughts, but more present. The tone is not frightening. It is not painful. It is, in the specific register that it occupies, perfect. Not in the aesthetic sense, but in the physical sense, in the sense that a key is perfect for the lock it was made for, and then it is over. And in the silence that follows, you understand something that the 11 years of service and the 47 deployments and the 4 dead brothers and the things without names had not quite crystallized until this moment. You are here. Not here, meaning in this fortress, in this corridor, standing on this deck plating. Here, in the sense of present at the right place at the right moment, which is a thing that most people in the galaxy's history do not get to experience consciously. The bell has told you this, not in words, in resonance. You run to the vault's housing chamber. Everyone does. In the history of the fortress, no one has ever needed to order the garrison to respond to the bell. The sound does something to you that overrides the normal chains of command and duty assignment. You are there because you need to be there, and the need is not a thought. It is a fact about your body, something your legs knew before your mind did. When you arrive at the housing chamber, the door is open. Not all the way, never all the way. One chamber is accessible, its entrance appearing in the door's face as though it had always been there and was simply previously concealed, which is exactly what has happened. The watch commander is already present. The chamber of vigilance begins arriving in 1s and 2s over the next several minutes. Weapons are readied not out of expectation of threat, but out of training so deeply embedded that it operates without instruction. The light from inside the open chamber is the vault's own light, self-generated, slightly different in color temperature from the fortress's artificial lighting, warmer, older seeming. And then someone goes inside. That is what happens. Someone goes inside and brings out what the vault has chosen to give, and the bell rings again when the chamber closes, and then the hard part begins. Figuring out what you have been given, and why, and what you are supposed to do with it. This experience is transformative in ways that the Death Watch's senior leadership has documented and discussed for centuries. Every warrior who is present at a vault opening describes the experience differently, in ways that reveal what they individually were thinking about and attending to at the moment of the bell. But they share something across those differences: the sense of being included. The sense that the vault, which has been silent and impenetrable and unknowable for all the years of your service, has acknowledged your presence, has chosen at this moment to give something to the force you are part of, has assessed the situation, whatever vast and inhuman assessment process it employs, and determined that now is the time, and here are the people, and this is what they need. Warriors who have experienced vault openings are changed by the experience, not dramatically. There is no conversion moment, no sudden revelation, but they carry something afterward that they did not carry before. The vault has shown them, in a moment that words do not adequately capture, what it means to serve a purpose that is larger than your individual service. The bell rang because the situation needed it to ring. You were there because the situation needed you to be there. The vault gave what it gave because the moment required it. And you will now go out into the darkness of the Jericho Reach and act on what you were given. And the action you take will be a small but necessary part of something that was always going to happen, that was always building toward this, that will eventually build toward the final opening and the final truth. This is what the bell gives you beyond whatever is carried out of the open chamber. It gives you the felt understanding of being part of something ancient and patient and correct. It gives you the specific kind of peace that comes from knowing you are in the right place. The warriors of Watch Fortress Ariosk who have heard the bell carry it with them forever. They do not speak of it often, but when they are in the field, in the worst moments of combat where the outcome is uncertain and the cost has already been enormous and the question of whether this was worth it presses on them the way cold presses on exposed skin. In those moments, they remember the sound, the resonance in the metal, the fact of being present at the right moment, the knowledge that the vault, which has been right about everything across 10,000 years of operation, chose this moment and chose them. It is enough. It has always been enough. Supplemental depth, the other Death Watch. What Ariok means to the rest of the chapter. Watch. Fortress Ariok is one Death Watch installation among many across the galaxy, and the Omega Vault is a secret so carefully maintained that the majority of Death Watch warriors serving elsewhere in the Imperium are not fully informed of what it contains or what it does. This is by design. The security of the Vault's existence, the prevention of its location and nature becoming widely known, is a primary operational priority of Ariok's command, and information about the Vault is shared on a strictly need-to-know basis that extends no further than the operational requirements of the Jericho Reach campaign. This means that Space Marines seconded to the Death Watch from their parent chapters, rotating through the standard term of service, and then returning to their original companies, carry back memories of Arios that are incomplete in very specific ways. They remember the fortress's scale, its age, its extraordinary collections of xenological specimens and archive material. They remember the quality of the warriors they served alongside. They remember the peculiar atmosphere of the place, the quiet, the sense of weight, the feeling that they were standing in a location that had been holding something important for a very long time. They remember the deep corridors and the great halls and the ossuaries with their millions of accumulated dead. They do not remember the vault because they were never directly told about it. The vault's presence is not a secret that requires active concealment from the Marines stationed at Ariok. They know something significant is at the fortress's core. They feel the vault's influence on the culture of the place. They may have heard the bell during their service, but the specific history and nature of the Omega Vault is shared only with those who remain at Ariok long enough to need that knowledge for their operational duties. The result is a peculiar kind of institutional echo. Deathwatch veterans who served at Ariok and have since returned to their parent chapters carry something back with them that they cannot fully explain. They are quieter than they were, in the specific way that Ariok produces quietness. They are more patient. They make different kinds of decisions under pressure, more willing to wait, more comfortable with uncertainty, less likely to force a situation that might resolve itself better if allowed to develop. Their chapters notice this. Most attribute it to the general transformative effect of Deathwatch service, which is real and documented. A few, the most perceptive commanders and chaplains, suspect something more specific, that Ariok does something to the people who serve there that other watch fortresses do not do, that the particular character of that posting produces a particular character in the warriors who have experienced it. They are right, of course. They simply do not have the information necessary to understand why. There is a small community of Deathwatch scholars who have attempted to study this effect systematically, documenting the changes in returned veterans from Ariok versus veterans from other watch fortresses, looking for patterns that might illuminate what the Ariok posting does that others do not. Their work is hampered by the limited information they are permitted to access, and their conclusions are necessarily incomplete. But they have identified the effect clearly enough to name it, in their internal communications, as the Ariok temperament, and they note carefully that warriors who display this temperament tend to perform unusually well in the most extreme situations. Not necessarily in standard combat. The difference in combat performance is marginal, but in situations involving very high uncertainty, very high stakes, and the specific kind of decision-making pressure that comes when you must act on incomplete information, with enormous consequences for error, Ariok veterans perform measurably better than the control group. They are, in a very precise sense, the Vault's graduates. They have been shaped by proximity to a 10,000-year plan. They carry that shaping back into the galaxy when they leave. And perhaps, in the slow multiplication of that temperament across the Deathwatch, and then into the parent chapters that receive veterans back, perhaps the Vault's influence does not stop at the walls of Watch Fortress Ariok. Perhaps it extends slowly, through the warriors it touches, across the Deathwatch as a whole, and into the broader Imperium of Man. Perhaps the Vault has been shaping more than just the Jericho Reach for 10,000 years. Perhaps it has been shaping, in small ways, the entire institution that guards it, preparing not just a force but a culture, a set of values and capabilities distributed across hundreds of chapters and thousands of warriors, for the moment when the final lock falls and the bell rings one last time, and humanity needs to be ready for whatever truth and whatever weapon emerge together from the innermost chamber. The Vault gives what the moment requires. The moment, in this reading, may require more than a single fortress. It may require an entire tradition of thought and action that the Vault has been quietly cultivating across 10,000 years of patient, careful, beautiful work. The last fortress is truth, and the truth has been building for a very long time. Supplemental depth. The Tau star charts. A mystery within a mystery. One of the loose threads in the Omega Vault's story that deserves more examination than it typically receives is the question of how the Tau came to possess star charts, directing them toward the Jericho Reach. This detail is easy to pass over in the larger narrative of the Vault's gifts and the Three-Front War, but when you slow down and consider it carefully, it opens onto depths that are genuinely startling. The Tau, as noted earlier, are a young starfaring species. They achieved spaceflight capability relatively recently by galactic standards, within the last few thousand years, well after the Horus Heresy, well after the period in which the Omega Vault is believed to have been constructed. At the time of the Vault's probable construction, the Tau were not traveling between stars. They were, at best, a developing species on their home world and its immediate neighbors. They were not, in any functional sense, a factor in the strategic calculations of a human civilization at the height of its technological power. And yet, the Tau arrived in the Jericho Reach following star charts. Charts specific enough to direct an expeditionary force to a particular region of the galaxy with the confidence that there was something worth going there for. Charts that are apparently old enough that their origin predates the Tau's awareness of where they came from, old enough that when Deathwatch intelligence has attempted to trace the chart's provenance through captured Tau sources, the answer has been something along the lines of, "We have always had these," or "They were with us when we first went to the stars." This is extraordinary. If the Tau always had these charts, if the charts were present at or near the beginning of their interstellar expansion, then the charts were given to them before they could navigate by them, before they could use them. Before the Jericho Reach was a strategic concern for a spacefaring Tau civilization. Someone gave the Tau a map to a destination they wouldn't be able to reach for centuries or millennia, knowing that when they eventually could reach it, they would go there. Think about what this implies for the Vault's builder, if the Vault's builder is also the source of the Tau charts. They had a plan that required a Tau expeditionary force in the Jericho Reach at a specific time. The only way to ensure that outcome, given that the Tau did not yet have spaceflight when the plan was being made, was to give them the information that would direct them there when they eventually did. A nudge, delivered across millennia, timed to produce a specific outcome in a specific place at a specific moment. This is the kind of thinking that the Vault embodies in physical form. The same patient, long timeline, multivariable orchestration that the Vault's gifts represent in the domain of the Death Watch is represented in the Tau's presence in the Jericho Reach. The Vault's builder was not just thinking about what the Death Watch would need. They were thinking about the entire strategic environment, what forces would be present, what pressures would be active, what combination of threats would produce a crisis requiring the specific solution the Vault contains. The Tau are part of the puzzle, not villains, not exactly, not innocent bystanders, certainly. Something more complicated, an actor on the stage whose presence was arranged because their presence serves a function in the larger design. Whether the Tau serve that function by being defeated, or by surviving and playing some role in the resolution of the Jericho Reach's crisis, or by something else entirely, the Vault knows. The Vault has always known. The Tau star charts are its acknowledgement that human solutions to the Jericho Reach's problems may not be entirely human in their composition. There is a specific piece of evidence within the Vault's own gift history that points at this interpretation. The stellar coordinates from the 274.M38 data crystal, the ones that led to the astropath's death with a warning not to approach, point to a location in the Jericho Reach that has never been visited. The location's significance is unknown, but its position, when mapped against the Tau's documented movements in the Canis salient and the overall geography of the Three-Front War, falls in an area that the Tau expeditionary force has been methodically avoiding. Not because they have been pushed back from it by Imperial forces. They haven't been engaged there specifically. They seem to be declining to go there. An expeditionary force that arrived in the region following star charts is navigating around a specific location as though that location is known to them and known to be something they should not approach. The coordinates that the Vault gave, that the dying astropath warned about, are apparently known to the Tau as well. And the Tau, a species that is generally aggressive in its exploration and expansion, has decided that whatever is there is not something they want to encounter. What is it those coordinates that both a psychically sensitive human astropath and a Tau expeditionary force with their own mysterious star charts have independently decided to avoid is a question that no entity currently in the Jericho Reach can answer. It may be one of the things that the Vault's final truth clarifies. The danger that the astropath's warning pointed at may be the root of everything. The thing inside the Hadex anomaly given a specific location, a specific address, a specific target for the last weapon. Or it may be something else entirely. The Jericho Reach contains multitudes, as regions of space abandoned for thousands of years tend to do, and the Vault has not finished revealing what it knows. Supplemental depth, forgotten predecessors, the question of who was here before. Watch Fortress Ariok has the Death Watch in it now, and the Death Watch has been there for long enough that the history of their specific presence is measured in thousands of years. But the fortress is older than the Death Watch, older potentially than the Imperium of Man in its current form. And the question of who was in the fortress before the Death Watch is one that the lore raises without fully resolving. The evidence for pre-Death Watch occupation of Ariok is in the details. The protocol for the guard change at the Vault's housing chamber contains elements that predate Death Watch practice. This is documented fact within the setting, not inference. The Watch Commander's Chronicle references the incorporation of older ritual elements into the current protocol and notes, with evident curiosity but no resolution, that the source of those older elements could not be traced. They were simply there, embedded in the practice of guarding the Vault when the Death Watch arrived. Who embedded them? Whoever was guarding the Vault before the Death Watch got there. The question of how the Death Watch came to be stationed at Ariok, Not how was the Death Watch founded in general, but specifically, how did this particular organization come to be established in this particular fortress? Is one that the Chronicle does not address with satisfying completeness. The standard account is that the Death Watch's presence in the Jericho Reach was established because the region's alien threats required a dedicated response force, and Watch Fortress Arios was the installation available to host that force. But this account has a sequencing problem. It implies that the installation was already there and available before the Death Watch arrived, which means someone else had been maintaining it prior to that point. That someone, whoever they were, left behind more than just the guard protocol. The great ossuaries, which are vast enough to contain the dead of many more generations than the Death Watch alone has produced, were built before the Death Watch was there. The quarantine sections, with their alien technology and the things that respond to human presence, predate the Death Watch. The xenological archive in the vault-adjacent chambers, which contains specimens that would have required centuries of collection effort by an organized group with expeditionary capabilities, existed before the Death Watch began adding to it. Whoever was here before, they were here for a long time. Long enough to build major infrastructure, long enough to collect a significant xenological archive, long enough to create and embed a specific ritual protocol for guarding the vault's housing chamber. A protocol sophisticated enough that when the Death Watch arrived and found it, they could not determine its origin, but could recognize its purpose and deemed it worth preserving. The most plausible interpretation is that the vault's builder, whoever constructed the cylinder and its contents and the fortress around it, also established an initial guard force, a human organization, pre-Death Watch, with a specific mandate to guard the fortress and the vault, until a time when a more appropriate guardian could be established. This organization existed, perhaps for thousands of years, performing the long vigil before the Death Watch gave it that name. They built the ossuaries, they collected the specimens, they maintained the guard protocol, and then, at some point, they handed off the responsibility, formally, ritually, in a ceremony that left the protocol but not the record of the ceremony itself, to the organization that would carry it forward. The Death Watch does not know the names of these predecessors. Their contributions to Ariok's physical and institutional infrastructure have been absorbed and continued without acknowledgement, because there is no acknowledged record. They are the unnamed First Watchers, the people who held the vigil before the vigil had its current name. The vault's builder planned for them too. You do not build a structure with ossuaries large enough for the dead of 10,000 years, and trust to chance that someone will fill the role of guardian for that entire period. The initial guard was established intentionally, resourced intentionally, and given a continuity mechanism, the protocol, the archive, the ossuaries, that would survive the transition from one guardian organization to the next. The vault's builder was thinking about succession, about the transfer of institutional knowledge and sacred duty across organizational changes and the passage of centuries, about what must be preserved across transition points to ensure that whoever arrives at the vault's final opening has the full weight of what came before to stand on. This is what the great bell signals, at every ringing, that the chain is unbroken, that the thing built in the dark age of technology to be present in the late 41st millennium has reached another moment of its intended operation, and the guardians who are always going to be here are indeed here, and the plan is still running, and the final chapter is still approaching. The unnamed watchers who came before held the vigil. The Death Watch holds it now, and whoever holds it at the final opening, whatever warriors are present when the last lock falls and the innermost chamber opens for the first time, will stand in a line that reaches back further than the current Imperium, further than the heresy, further than the unified human civilization that the Emperor built and that catastrophe brought down. The last fortress is truth. And the truth has been kept faithfully since the beginning by people who knew it was worth keeping, even when they could not see the end of the story they were serving. That is the deepest answer to why nobody opens the Omega Vault. Not because they can't, not because they won't, because the vault belongs to the whole of that line of keepers, every warrior who ever stood in its housing chamber, every commander who ever read the Chronicle, every watcher whose bones fill a chamber of the great ossuaries. It cannot be opened by one person's will or one organization's need. It opens for the fullness of the vigil, for the completion of the line, for the moment when the plan that was begun in the distant past reaches the moment toward which it was always moving. The vault will know that moment when it arrives. It has always known it. It has been waiting for it since the first day it was sealed, with the quiet certainty of something that was built to outlast everything except the truth it was built to tell. The last lock is almost gone. The bell is almost ready to ring for the last time. And in the corridors of an impossible fortress, in the middle of a war that was always going to happen, in a region of space that someone considered worth preparing for before most of its current inhabitants were born, the Watchers wait. As they have always waited, as they will always wait, until the moment that no longer requires waiting. Supplemental depth, the document you cannot read, on the sealed chronicle. There is one more thing worth considering before we finally close this exploration, and it concerns a document rather than a place. The chronicle of vault openings maintained by successive watch commanders at Ariok is not a single document. It is an accumulation, layers of documentation in different hands across thousands of years, some sections written in High Gothic, some in older forms of Low Gothic that require specialist translation, some in languages that were apparently the personal ciphers of individual watch commanders who chose not to record their most sensitive reflections in any language that others could easily access. The chronicle is enormous. Its physical extent, volumes of parchment and vellum, later supplemented by data stacks and cogitator records as the Mechanicus's preferred media for archiving changed across the millennia, occupies a significant section of the Ariok Archive's most restricted tier. Most of the chronicle is accessible to the senior members of the Chamber of Vigilance. They study it, they reference it, they draw on it for strategic context and historical analysis. The chronicle is an active working document, not simply a historical record. It is the institutional memory of the Vigil, the thread of continuity that runs through every watch commander's tenure and connects every opening to every other opening. But there are sections of the chronicle that are not accessible, not to the Chamber of Vigilance, not to anyone currently serving at Ariok. These sections are encrypted in ciphers that the watch commander's archive has not been able to break, despite centuries of effort by some of the most gifted cryptographers the Imperium's military forces have produced. They are not damaged, the parchment is intact, the ink has not faded, the data storage media remain functional. They are simply unreadable by anyone who does not already know the key. The Watch Commander's tradition holds that these sections exist to protect information whose premature disclosure would be harmful, truth so significant that even the senior leadership of the Ariok garrison should not access them until the moment when knowing them is necessary. There is a theory, advanced carefully and with appropriate tentativeness by the current Master of Librarians, that the encrypted sections of the Chronicle are designed to become readable when the vault's final opening approaches, that the encryption key is somehow tied to the same conditions that govern the vault's own lock mechanism, and that when the last lock falls, the last encrypted section will also open. This would mean that the Chronicle itself is a part of the vault's design, not a separate document that happens to have been kept alongside the vault for thousands of years, but an integrated component of the same system, a parallel track of revelation that delivers its final information at the same moment as the innermost chamber. The vault gives the physical truth and the final weapon. The Chronicle's sealed sections give the context for understanding both, the full history of what the Vigil has been building toward, written by the people who built it and sealed away until the moment when it would be needed. If this theory is correct, then the opening of the innermost chamber will not be a moment of mystery followed by a long period of analysis. It will be a moment of simultaneous revelation. The chamber opens, the Chronicle's sealed sections open, and the full picture becomes clear all at once. The final truth and the last weapon will arrive together with the complete documentation of why they exist, what they are for, and how they should be used. Every watch commander who has read the accessible sections of the Chronicle and stood before the encrypted sections has had the same experience, the sense that they are reading the majority of a story whose most important chapters are being withheld from them. Not maliciously, the withholding is clearly a matter of timing, clearly designed to protect rather than to tease. But the frustration of reading around the edges of a revelation you cannot quite access is one that the Chronicle documents repeatedly in the personal reflections of watch commanders across the ages. They all knew they were reading an incomplete text. They all accepted the incompleteness because the vault's history had given them every reason to trust that the incompleteness was intentional and the completion would come. The completion is coming. The last few locks are almost gone. The encrypted sections are waiting to be read. The final truth is waiting to be spoken. The last fortress is truth, and the truth is almost here.